All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the House Environment and Transportation Committee for Tuesday, February 25th. Our first bill is HB 1052, Delegate Charkoudian, Corporations and Associations, Limited Equity Housing Cooperatives Establishment. We have some friends from Ways and Means sitting in as well, members and staff. Delegate Charkoudian, if you have a panel, please bring them up.
I do. Thank you so much. Great. Thank you. Mr. Chair, colleagues, for the record, Delegate Lorig Charkoudian here asking for a favorable report on House Bill 1052. I actually want to start by thanking all of you for the great work that you've done over the last several years to really build more and ensure and protect more affordable and attainable housing in the state. And so in the spirit of the gratitude for that work, the recognition of how much work is left to do, I'm presenting this bill, which I think is a really important tool in the toolbox, and it will allow for the creation of limited equity housing cooperatives in the state. So right now, we have a range of types of housing that make housing affordable and attainable. We also have housing cooperatives, but what we don't have is a path forward for limited equity housing cooperatives. And so specifically, you're going to get to hear from some of my panel about the importance of this, but I'll just mention a couple of things. Specifically, what the limited equity housing cooperative does is it ensures that a group of tenants who come together to create this cooperative with the explicit goal of home ownership that remains affordable and attainable, create that model, institute it, and then ensure that as the people who are now shifting from being tenants to being owners of these limited equity cooperative housing units, have the opportunity to continue to sell that and keep it affordable going forward. So it's a very specific model. It'll be right for some tenants in that conversion. It won't be right for every housing situation, but we think it's a really important piece in the mix of the various types of housing that we have in the state. So I got to know this approach through a number of tenants in Tacoma Park who purchased using the right of first refusal, which is another thing that I know has been debated and discussed here. The Tacoma Park has the right of first refusal. They managed to purchase the building from the landlord, and now they have been working on converting it to a limited equity cooperative. In that process, they found out that we essentially don't have a pathway for that in the state of Maryland. They've learned a lot. We've all learned a lot in trying to support their efforts from DC, where this is a really significant piece of the mix in DC. And we have Mikasa from DC here, and we've learned a lot from them, but we really didn't have a path here. So I just want to say, you'll hear more about the model and the approach from my colleagues. I want to say a couple things about the bill itself. We looked to DC and we also looked to other states in creating the statute. We've engaged with the statutory language. We've engaged with SDAT and DHCD. I'm not sure if DHCD is here in person. It's my understanding they're supportive of the bill. We're working with SDAT. There's a couple of things just in the way that the bill ended up being drafted that need to be fixed. So I want to just comment preemptively on the fiscal note. The timing of when this goes into effect affected SDAT's computer systems and the upgrades they needed, and so we've already discussed with them postponing the start date to 2026, which will take their fiscal note from 2.5 million to 250,000. And then there's a couple of other things in terms of filing the papers as opposed to having the co-op required to have the papers on file internally will change the fiscal note in terms of the number of people SDAT will have to have on staff to review documents, and a few other things that we're working on, as I said, with SDAT that related to changing from conditional, whether or not there's conditional approval. So I won't bore you with all the details, but suffice it to say, we're working with them, and we think we've solved all of the issues, and we'll have amendments ready to go probably by the end of this week. So excited for you to be able to hear from my panel, and happy to take any questions after that, and we'll start here.
Good afternoon. My name is Claudia Wilson-Randall. I'm the Executive Director of the Community Development Network of Maryland. The mission of the Community Development of Maryland is to promote, strengthen, and advocate for the community development sector through Maryland's urban, suburban, and rural communities. And our organization envisions thriving Maryland communities where people of all incomes have opportunities for themselves and their families. I'm here today to speak in favor of House Bill 1052. I want to say that currently on the books in Maryland is a statute that says that residents can form limited equity co-ops, but the statute is simply unworkable as written. So this bill is really to correct that so that tenants can find a workable solution and use the limited equity co-op model. And as you all know, housing is an urgent priority for economic growth in the state of Maryland. Given its connection to health, education, and the cost implications for families living in unstable homes and with urgent housing instability, we need to figure out strategies to increase the supply of affordable homes throughout the state. This is one such model. Right now in Maryland, the average fair market rent for a two-bedroom apartment is $1,909. According to the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, the difference between what people need to earn and the rents available is significant. We lack about 130,000 affordable units across the state, and we need to find strategies which actually help more affordable housing to be created, and this is one. I urge your support for House Bill 1052.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. My name is Judy Tribal, and I am Secretary of the Leland Tenant Association. I am here to speak in favor of HB 1052. The Leland Tenant Association is a group of neighbors committed to nurturing the sustainability of our larger community, keeping our homes safe and affordable, and supporting each other's well-being. In 2021, our landlord put our building at 112 Lee Ave in Tacoma Park up for sale, which threatened to displace all of the 15 low-income households living there. In October of 2022, the Leland Tenant Association utilized Tacoma Park's tenant opportunity to purchase law to successfully acquire the property. The LTA's intention has always been to convert the building to a limited equity co-op, ensuring it would remain affordable and owned by the residents in perpetuity. Although more than 90 limited equity co-ops thrive in the District of Columbia, there are none in the state of Maryland. We soon learned the reason why. The existing state laws make the creation of a limited equity co-op confusing, expensive, and time-consuming. HB 1052 would simplify the process and allow more tenant associations to follow our lead. This bill, were it to become law, would create another tool to stem the growing housing crisis within the state of Maryland. I urge a favorable report on HB 1052. Thank you.
Dear Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and members of the Environment and Transportation Committee, my name is Will Duggan, and I'm representing Mi Casa, Inc., a 501c3 nonprofit, and we are here to support the passage of HB 1052. Mi Casa has been working since 1992 in the DMV area to support affordable housing. We secure funding to develop affordable rental units, single-family homes, and limited equity cooperatives. Since 2002, our tenant purchase program has been working to develop limited equity cooperatives in DC. I actually live in a limited equity cooperative that was developed by my organization in the early 2010s, and I've been a member of a limited equity cooperative since 2015. and I've been working with the Leland Tenant Association as an employee of Mikasa Inc., helping them in their self-determination initiative to purchase their building and establish near permanent affordable housing in a high market pressure environment of Tacoma Park. And it's been a very exciting pilot initiative in which we've learned that, as was said in prior testimony, that the legal pathways for doing so make it difficult and to a certain extent, risky process for a tenant association to go forward with. And the Leland Tenant Association has been fearless in pushing forward in what this model can achieve, which is, anti-displacement and near permanent affordability when combined with additional tools. And so I'm here today to answer any questions that anyone might have. And I'm really excited for the committee considering this important legislation to carve out this legal pathway so that this limited equity cooperative model can coexist among additional ownership models in order to solve for the affordable housing and home ownership issues that people need to stay in place in their communities. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from Delegate Healy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for this very creative bill. I'm fascinated. I happen to represent Greenbelt, which has basically the largest and oldest cooperative in the state, and it was started in the Roosevelt administration, and it was started along these lines in some ways because theoretically, when people would buy in, it was a co-op, you don't own the property, you buy a piece of it, but when you sell it, you had to sell it back to the co-op, and that eventually was outlawed by a court case. And they had to go into a different model, which is what we have now. So I have like 3 questions. What, is there a limit to the size of an entity that can convert into this kind of co-op that you're talking about?
In this bill, there's not.
Okay. The tax exemption, is that permanent or is that just for a period of time?
It's the first 5 years.
Okay, so it's completely exempt from the tax, there's no limit to the size. I'm just thinking about Greenbelt with their history. If 1,500 units wanted to convert, it would take a big chunk out of the city of Greenbelt's property taxes for 5 years. So that's something for us to think about. The last question is about, is this really only for renters to switch, or can an existing co-op or a piece of a existing co-op switch over to this kind of?
Yeah. So thanks for all those questions. I'll start with the last one, and then I want to move backwards to. So the way the bill is written, any entity can become a limited equity co-op. So not restricted to tenants. It's just the project that we're working on that I learned about this through is tenant ownership. And I think a lot of the ones in DC, if I'm not mistaken, will start that way with tenants using the right of first refusal, purchasing the building, and then making this conversion. So that's a common way that this would happen, but it's not restricted to that. In terms of the 5 years and the tax exemption, I think I'm open to a range of amendments on this. I think it's really important to have the path. I think the more urgent thing is to create the path. I think the tax exemption is a nice piece of it in the sense that we're trying to support this conversion and we're trying to support this as a tool for for housing affordability and accessibility. But I'm not married to that piece of it. And so if this committee or Ways and Means or others wanted to adjust that piece of the bill, I would be open to suggestions on that.
Thank you.
Delegate Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for this very interesting bill. I am interested in understanding the difference between an existing co-op and this type of co-op. And in light of brevity of time, you can just send that to me so that I can understand it more thoroughly. All I'm interested in right now is the difference between the two.
Okay, do you mean like conceptually the difference or the statutory difference?
Statutory.
Okay.
Great. Any additional questions on this bill? Okay, thank you. That concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 1052. We'll turn to House Bill 1085, Delegate Fair, Housing Authorities Tax Exempt Status Modifications. We are again joined by colleagues from Ways and Means, and if you have a panel, please bring them up.
Yep. They are on their way up. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Am I okay to begin, sir? Thank you. Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and esteemed members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. For the record, Delegate Chris Fair presenting House Bill 1085. In 2015, 2018, and 2019, Baltimore City, Montgomery County, and Howard County each asked to extend the existing tax credit for their housing authorities to nonprofit entities controlled by those respective housing authorities, a concept that the General Assembly passed nearly unanimously each time it's been requested. The jurisdictions asked for the legislation because available federal funding for affordable housing projects decreased year after year. To address the decrease in funding, housing authorities sought the express ability to create nonprofit entities that could seek different forms of funding and manage and hold assets for specific projects without jeopardizing their existing credits. So now, under the local laws, the General Assembly passed the housing authorities, affiliated nonprofit entities in those 3 jurisdictions can take advantage of various programs designed to foster public-private investment partnerships without impacting those projects' eligibility with the other tax credits typically afforded to housing authorities under state law. House Bill 1085 simply gives the same ability to the rest of the state's housing authorities. It allows them to take advantage of the modern financing programs and legal ownership structures that Baltimore City, Montgomery County, and Howard County use to facilitate their hard work. The bill takes a tool that has worked in 3 jurisdictions to lower costs and unlock investment funding for affordable housing development, maintenance, and administration, and enables that tool for the other local jurisdictions and their housing authority. And just like the existing laws, counties may negotiate a payment in lieu of taxes agreement with between the nonprofit entities and their local jurisdictions for any lost local revenue. House Bill 1085 standardizes the toolkit for Maryland's public housing authorities. It's another step we can take to lower the costs and barriers to affordable, sanitary, and safe housing for all jurisdictions, and to address the housing crisis our state is facing. For these reasons, I ask the committee for a favorable report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Mike Font, and I represent New Harbor Development, an affordable housing developer based in Annapolis. I'm here to testify in favor of HB 1085, a bill that empowers all Maryland housing authorities to preserve, redevelop, and modernize their public housing communities. Housing authorities play a critical role in our affordable housing ecosystem by specifically serving public housing residents and voucher holders. Unfortunately, the housing authorities are largely reliant on federal funding, which is often inadequate and currently at risk, and they face the additional challenges of an aging public housing stock, much of which was built in the 1960s and 70s. These older properties frequently present environmental issues and have become functionally obsolete, underscoring the urgent need for modernization. HB 1085 is designed to extend existing tax exemption to all housing authorities statewide. Under current law, public housing communities owned solely by their local housing authority qualify for a full property tax exemption. However, when these housing authorities seek to redevelop or preserve their communities using low-income housing tax credits, they must restructure ownership to include private investors. This transition risks the loss of the critical tax exemption that has historically supported their efforts. Today, only Baltimore City, Howard County, and Montgomery County benefit from a provision that preserves this tax exemption with partial ownership that is necessary for tax credit financing. HB 1085 seeks to expand the benefit to every Maryland housing authority, urban, suburban, and rural, ensuring that all can access modern financing tools without sacrificing the financial support essential for their mission. In summary, HB 1085 is vital to modernizing and preserving Maryland's public housing. It enables housing authorities to secure the necessary capital for redevelopment while maintaining the tax exemption that underpins their ability to provide safe, adequate, and service-enriched housing to our most vulnerable residents. Thank you for your time and consideration. I encourage a favorable report on HB 1085.
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Angie Lawler, and I represent the Housing Authority of the City of Frederick. We strongly support HB 1085. 1085. This bill is about preserving and strengthening affordable housing, ensuring PHAs can continue to serve low-income families, seniors, and individuals with disabilities without the financial burden of property taxes. Public housing authorities play a unique, mission-driven role in providing stable, affordable housing, prioritizing community needs over financial returns. PHAs reinvest every dollar into resident services, property maintenance, and community improvements rather than generating profits for investors. By allowing PHAs to maintain their property tax exemption when participating in affordable housing development, the state allows these funds to be reinvested directly into housing preservation, modernization, and critical support programs for residents. PHAs are also long-term stewards of affordable housing, ensuring stability in ways that private entities cannot. While private owners may convert affordable units to market-rate housing once restrictions expire, PHAs prevent displacement and gentrification by keeping these homes affordable. A tax exemption would allow PHAs' ability to sustain affordable housing by lowering costs and stretching public dollars further. The Housing Authority of the City of Frederick is currently in the process of redeveloping our Lucas Village public housing community, which includes 88 households which were displaced due to life, health, and safety concerns. This exemption would directly benefit the redevelopment of this community by preserving affordability and allowing us to maintain our tax-exempt status, stretching public dollars further as we rebuild a safer, more sustainable community. By supporting HB 1085, you're empowering Maryland's housing authorities to continue providing safe, stable, and affordable housing for those who need it most. I encourage you to vote favorable on this bill. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and members of the committee. Tom Cole on behalf of the Maryland Affordable Housing Coalition. The coalition is made up of 185 affordable housing developers, operators, and advocates. Of those, 8 public housing authorities. Public housing authorities serve a fundamental and important purpose in providing housing for those in the deepest levels of poverty. And the low-income housing tax credit program is a fundamental way we're providing affordable housing across the country. This bill is necessary for all of our public housing authorities to be able to use the powerful vehicle of the low-income housing tax credit to serve their mission in all of your communities. Now, public housing authorities also serve an important function in that they cooperate and are a part of government, so they can meet governmental needs. Government doesn't pay taxes. Government infrastructure doesn't pay taxes. This tax exemption is fundamental to a public housing authority. So we very much thank our sponsor and the co-sponsors on this bill of recognizing the value of public housing authorities and the purpose they serve, and seek to expand what we know works in Baltimore City, Howard, and Montgomery counties to all of the public housing authorities in the state, and encourage the creation of other public housing authorities to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. My name is Melissa Maddox Evans. I am Executive Director and CEO of the Housing Authority of the City of Annapolis. We serve over 1,300 families and are the largest landlord here in the City of Annapolis and at large Anne Arundel County with regards to affordable housing opportunities. We are in favor of HB 1085 and request that you approve as favorable also. The reason being, we are vehicles of investment in the City of Annapolis. When we engage in affordable housing projects, we invest in the entire economy. We create not only housing that is affordable to our local citizens, but jobs. In our current portfolio, we have already invested over $82 million to the City of Annapolis. In our future projects, we anticipate investing over $400 million in investment in the city. In order to do that, tax exemption requirements are crucial for these projects to be affordable and for them to be feasible for us to do. So we ask that you would consider voting this bill as favorable in order to ensure continued local investment in the local economy here for our citizens of Annapolis. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you all. We have a question from Vice Chair Boyce.
Mr. Chair, thank you so much, Delegate, for bringing this bill. I just want to check in with you from Baltimore City. They do have a favorable with an amendment, and I was wondering if you are amenable to the language that they're asking for.
I have taken those amendments to the advocates for the bill, and I'll let Mr. Cole weigh in on that.
Yes, the Affordable Housing Coalition supports that amendment. We think that it is in furtherance of the intent of the bill and is very helpful. I will note there was a proposed amendment by MACO that would upset the whole purpose of the bill.
Right, I saw that as well.
But
Yeah.
Baltimore City's proposed amendment, again, it furthers the intent of the bill.
We appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any additional questions? Okay, thank you. That concludes the bill here on House Bill 1085. We turn to House Bill 1428, which will be presented by Delegate Ampry. And I just want to remind folks, it's one sponsor per bill. Now, we let Delegate Naraki and Delegate Shalega both sit at the table for a bill. And I know how much Delegate Ampry and Delegate Boafo want to be like Delegates Naraki and Shalega. So we're going to let them do the same here. But only one of you is testifying. And so we'll call up HB 1428, Sale of Residential Property, End Hedge Fund Control of Maryland Homes Act of 2025. And again, we're joined by colleagues from Ways and Means. Delegate Ampry, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, and members of the Ways and Means Committee. Here before you, for the record, Delegate Marlon Ampry here in support of House Bill 1428. The End Hedge Fund Control of Maryland Homes Act, again, joined here by my good friend, Delegate Adrian Boafo. This is a bill that's near and dear to my heart. Third time that I've brought a bill like this forward. Delegate Boafo had an additional bill that had some of the, that was working to take on the hedge fund community from buying up homes. We decided for efficiency's sake to put the bills together to save you the headache of 2 hearings. So the critical piece of this legislation that addresses the growing problem of corporate ownership of single-family homes in Maryland. This bill aims to ensure as we continue to encourage the building of more homes that are actually owned by Marylanders and not the wealthiest corporations. As I've testified before in this committee, we see across this nation an issue where we are seeing companies buying up huge swaths of homes that are normally places where people buy their first homes, create generational wealth, create home equity so they can send their kids to college, so they can start small businesses, and that is slowly slipping away from Americans across this country. And we want to make sure that here in the state of Maryland, that is not happening. We want to make sure that we have an administration, let's be honest, down the road in DC that is pro the hedge fund community, pro private equity, pro making sure these businesses can grow and be as big as possible. And I think it's important that here in Maryland we figure out ways to make sure that we are prioritizing individuals and families first when it comes to being able to purchase homes. House Bill 1428 creates a single family residence excise tax and it establishes the down payment and settlement expense loan program fund using a portion of this excise tax to help Marylanders gain a piece of the American dream. So that way we can actually use this tax funds to ensure that, hey, these hedge funds are going to own homes, they're going to pay more than their fair share. They're going to pay their fair share and ensure that that share that they're paying goes towards supporting families and individuals being able to purchase homes. And again, I want to make sure that I highlight that this isn't an issue where we're speculative in nature. It's literally happening across this country. In the past, I've brought up examples down in Texas where we're seeing entire, literally brand new subdivisions that are built immediately purchased by these hedge fund companies. If we're gonna be in alignment with the governor's goal of creating more affordable housing and more housing in the state, we've got to make sure that these hedge funds are not ready to come in and snatch up these homes. So just for evidence purposes, we've seen that in 2022, of all the homes purchased in North Carolina, for example, comparable state, 17% of those homes were purchased by corporate entities, right? So we want to make sure that that large of a number is not being done here in Maryland in the near future, and also ensuring that when it does happen, that they're paying their fair share. Also, the bill also incorporates the provisions that you've seen from me in the past, where we're ensuring that there's a right of first offer, so that whenever homes are put on the market and made available, that individuals, families, and even maybe small LLCs, individuals like members of this committee who own a few homes and want to have some residual income coming in, they would have the opportunity to have a bite at that apple. But we want to make sure that when a home is made available, that these big companies just don't come in and put in a big offer and just take the home out of the market, ensuring that individuals have access to the opportunity to buy these homes. And again, I think it's important, I just want to reiterate that, again, while we don't have the current problem that states like Texas, North Carolina, and other states have, we don't want to wait until that problem exists to do something about it. We want to make sure that we get in front of the problem. I like to always say that our job in the legislature isn't necessarily to fix problems. I think it's to present solutions that prevent a problem. And I think that this House Bill 1428 can present a solution to fix a problem. And again, I understand that the bill before you is quite lengthy. It's quite dense. I'm happy to have a legal conversation about all the provisions of the bill at a later time. Don't want to take up too much time going through the nuances of the bill in this hearing. But I just want to, I think that this committee, our body, is smart enough to figure out with this bill and what we can do around amendments and changes to the bill, work with even those in opposition to the bill to work towards what the goal of this bill is. The goal of this bill is to make sure we're protecting housing for individuals and families. So with that said, I urge a favorable report on House Bill 1428 and look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. First question is from Delegate Guyton.
Mr. Chair, thank you for bringing the bill, both delegates. So I love the proactive response, trying to get ahead of problems. I mean, I think we already have a problem, but one way of getting ahead of problems in housing. I do have a question based on some other legislation that we've heard in this committee so far this year about how this would work in conjunction with that. And we haven't passed it yet, so I don't know where that's going.
Right.
But I liked the idea of it. And that is the bill that says that you basically have a black box for the purchaser of a property, so there can be no discrimination.
Right.
How would a bill like this work with that? And you're an attorney, I'm sure, yes, I think. And is there a legal discrimination issue if we were to say for, regular people on the street, you don't have to give that information, but for other entities you do? I'm just real interested in how, I know you said you didn't want to go into the legal aspects, but I think there are a lot of legal aspects here that we would have to sort of work out. I'm just interested in that.
Yeah, so I know exactly what bill you're talking about.
Yeah.
When I was on this committee, there was a bill that we contemplated, and I think the merits of that bill are great. I love what the bill is trying to do. I think that that is a concern, possibly, that this might interfere, but I think there's a way we can work around that, where if you are a entity, you can say that whether or not you're an entity or not. And maybe you can still be blind, but you can say how you can maybe have on that form. If you are an entity, you can say you're an entity, and then you can say how much do you have in holdings, right? Because part of this bill is it's not all entities would be barred, or not all entities would be subject to this tax. It's entities of a certain size, right? Again, we're not looking to come against the small. There's people that have that play an important part in our industry, right? I think about when I was in College Park. We didn't have as many, there's way more housing there now, but there were individuals that own homes and companies that own homes and rented them out to students. We have a large military community here in Maryland. We have a large political community here that's moving in and out based on the political assignment. So it's important that we have a rental housing market, and there's a place where our smaller companies and businesses should have a place there. What we're worried about with this bill are these massive companies that are trading on Wall Street, and their goal is to buy up as much housing market as possible so that they can then take the rent prices way up, because there's nowhere else you can buy or rent where you can be comfortable. So I think that with your question, there's a world where we could work together to figure out how that works. But again, I can't speak to the other bill.
Thank you.
Delegate Healy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the bill. It's very interesting. My question, I don't know if this addresses this particular problem that I've heard about, where there's a new development, and somebody builds a couple hundred houses, and a big company comes in and buys up most of them or all of them before they're even offered on the market to the general public.
Right.
Does this bill address that issue?
Yeah, so this bill would address that problem. So the portion of the bill that was from the version of the bill that I brought in the past, where there's a right of first offer for the first 30 days. So for the first 30 days, the home is made available for sale. For those first 30 days, only individuals, families, or again, smaller companies could be able to make an offer on the home for those first 30 days. That's what the bill would do. So it would prevent the big companies from buying on the market before anyone else has a chance. And I think there's still a place where we can even add more language or amend to make sure that when you're building new homes, there's not this world where you're essentially just building new homes for Wall Street, right? We want homes to be built for the people, right? Not for Wall Street. And that's the goal of this bill.
Thank you.
Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Delegate and Delegate. So first of all, does this bill include townhouses as well, or is it just standalone?
This bill is focused on single-family homes. So don't think of it as apartments or large buildings that house a bunch of apartments or condos. It's more about single-family homes. So just think about, I think about the goal of this bill being that middle-class dream, right? Being able to buy a home that you and your family can live in, where you can build some equity, where you can pass it on down to your. So I think it would apply to, again, when I think of a townhome and being in Baltimore City, I think of like a row home.
Row home,
So
right.
it would apply to a row home, townhome, as long as it is, considered a single-family home, not like a, apartment
Apartments.
building of some sort. So, yeah, it applies to single-family homes, which includes those.
Great, thank you. And I'm curious the thinking about why to include small LLCs, because wouldn't the goal be to encourage homeownership, not rental?
No, look, I agree, but I think there's still an important component of our market where we're trying to, there's always going to be a world where LLCs own homes, and it's important to have a rental market, right? I'm in Baltimore City. I think my district has the most colleges than any other district in the state, right? So I have a lot of college students, and unfortunately, while I would love for our universities to have a place for every student to live the day they sign up to go to that school, the reality is that's not possible. So we rely on the private market to provide housing. And again, the military housing, we think about, I have hospitals in my district, travel nurses need somewhere to live, right? So you want to have a space where that industry can thrive. And again, it's okay. I'm fine with small businesses and they can be responsible. They're local and they're good landlords. The issue is, I don't want somebody in Wall Street and Silicon Valley owning all the 40% of the homes in Maryland. We don't want that. We want people who are local to Maryland, small businesses. I'm fine with them owning homes and having access to the ability to purchase homes. It's the big guys we want to make sure they're not just dominating the market.
Makes sense, thank you.
Okay, seeing no further questions, thank you very much. We'll bring up Albert Turner from Renters United Maryland. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. Vice Chair, Albert Turner of the Public Justice Center. Coming in favorable for House Bill 1428. We do represent tenants, particularly low-income tenants, so our base and clientele is tangentially related to this bill, particularly when it comes to housing affordability and the idea of becoming a future owner of a home. And so the idea of a hedge fund being able to buy up large swaths of property, particularly in Baltimore City where we practice, and being able to artificially increase the rent and also increase the value of a home to make a renter unable to transition from renter to homeowner is something that we would like to see, we do not want to see. That is something that we want to make sure that our tenants are able to be able to save money, to be able to become homeowners. In our written testimony, you'll see data showing that 68% of hedge funds are more likely than smaller landlords to file for evictions, imposing higher rent increases, inflating fees, and they are responsible for deteriorating housing conditions. Another issue that we have seen, which I think might be an issue in the near future, is that a number of these hedge funds we believe to be using AI property management, which is instead of having a property manager or super who is on the property and fixes issues, there is an AI type of chat box that the renter has to request maintenance on the property, and instead of someone coming in and fixing it, the tools and directions on how to fix the issue are sent to the tenant, and the tenant has to actually fix that. That is an issue that we've seen in Baltimore City, and for those reasons, we ask for a favorable review on this bill.
Thank you so much. I do not see any questions for this favorable witness, so we will turn to the opposition. We have Lisa May, Maryland Realtors, and Robert Enton, Maryland Building Industry Association. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Robert Enton on behalf of the Maryland Building Industry Association. Now, if you look at the fiscal note, it'll tell you that this is, I think, the fourth year that you've had a bill like this in front of the committee. And we've come in and opposed it for the builders every year. This year's bill is 15 pages long, with almost all new language. And one of the major elements, if you look at page 2 of the fiscal note, you'll see, even though it's a 15-page bill, there's a pretty good summary of what the bill does. And what the bill does, if you look at it, it'll say that the first thing is that it applies to anyone who owns an interest of more than 3% of residential property in a county in which the property is located. I don't know how you're going to administer that. I don't know how you're going to determine it. I don't know what the benchmark is for that, when it would occur. The next thing is, and I think it's quite amazing, for these properties, the state transfer tax is increased from 0.5% to 15%. I've never, quite frankly, with all due respect to the sponsor, seen anything quite like that. The next provision, you see it there, there's a 50% excise tax imposed on the acquisition of one of these residences. But there's a market out there where investors and builders want to build rent houses that are nice houses that people would want to rent. There's a market for that. That's why they do it. I just don't think that this bill addresses anything to do with affordable housing. The requirements in the bill are, frankly, with all due respect to the sponsors, pretty remarkable. So for those reasons, we're opposed to the bill and would ask for an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Lisa May with Maryland Realtors. We do share concerns about hedge fund ownership of properties, particularly large quantities of hedge fund ownership of properties. But this bill goes beyond that. We see it targeting those Maryland-based businesses that we all just agreed provide a very valuable source of rental housing, but it also impacts individual property sellers, and that's what I wanted to focus on here today. That transfer tax that Mr. Enton mentioned, along with the 30-day lockout period, we think it have very serious consequences for a property seller here in Maryland, and I'll explain why. The transfer tax is typically split between the buyer and the seller. However, that can be modified by contract. So if you're a smart investor, you're going to have that 30-day lockout period. You're going to see that there have been no offers made on that property. So if you want to purchase it, you are going to, number one, make a very lowball offer, and number two, require the seller to pay the entire transfer tax. Now, we have a median home price in Maryland of $425,000. A 15% transfer tax is over $63,000. So under this framework, a seller, just for taking the only offer that they got on the market, could have tens of thousands of dollars of their equity taken from them as a punishment. And we just think that that's wrong. That is not something that we can support. So if this bill were really very narrowly drawn to hedge funds, we might be here under just different circumstances. But based upon this, we just cannot offer our support as it is right now. Thank you.
Thank you. We have some questions. We'll start with Delegate Healy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Mr. Enton, I know you're an attorney. I want to ask the same question that Delegate Guyton asked earlier, which is, are there like equity issues where you can't single out certain classes of buyers for different kind of treatment? I'm not an attorney. I just have a question about it.
I'm not aware of that, quite frankly. I think as Delegate Amprey stated, we don't have this problem in Maryland. I'm not sure what goes on in
that wasn't
other
my question, though. My
jurisdictions.
question is really about whether there's a legal or a constitutional issue with some of the provisions in this bill.
Yeah, I just don't know. I'm happy to discuss that with our members and get back to you, Delegate Healy.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Boyce.
Mr. Chair, thank you so much. Ms. May, you did mention that if this bill were more narrowed to hedge funds, you would support it. Can you explain a little bit about why? Because in the larger scheme, I do think about, and for instance, in Baltimore City, when Mr. Kushner owned a swath of apartment buildings that were pretty much, for lack of a better term, trash. They were terrible. They were in poor condition. And then when we had a big windstorm, I think it really demolished all of those homes. So to your point, what is the narrow, and how do we protect communities, especially if these big companies are buying all this property and then they don't keep the value of the property and the quality of the property does go down?
No, thank you for that. One thing that is different in this bill than other iterations that have been here in the past is that on page 7, line 17, hedge fund taxpayer is defined.
Now, there are other definitions of other groups that are included in this, including page 4, real estate enterprise, and page 7, applicable taxpayers. So I think if a bill were narrowly drawn to that hedge fund taxpayer and the provisions applied to that, as well as taking the burden off of an individual property seller, that could very well be something that we might be able to look at and support.
And thank you so much. In your testimony, you also mentioned about the inability to, your concern is that the seller has no way of determining an entity meets the definition of a real estate enterprise. Good.
Yes, unless there is some list or some predetermination made by the state. If you have an LLC purchasing your property, you have no idea who is behind it, whether it is a hedge fund or just a single individual.
True. Okay, thank you.
Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to see you both. This could be to either of you. So we know that we have a substantial housing crisis in the state of Maryland. I just want to get your thoughts on, if this were to become law, what would this do to our already bad housing situation in the state of Maryland? What would it do to the housing supply? Do you think that we would have more housing supply in the state of Maryland if this were to become law, or would we have potentially less housing supply?
I mean, I would say, in my opinion, that we'd have less. Once again, the standards that would implement this law, I think, are hard to figure. But there is a market out there for rent for people that maybe don't have the ability to buy a home. Maybe someone's going to be here for a year or a shorter period. They want to rent a home. Sometimes older people don't want to sink the money into, a mortgage. But there is a market out there for this, and this bill would completely undermine that rental market. I think there'd be less housing.
And yeah, Delegate, there isn't, hedge funds don't own such a large part of our overall housing stock that banning them is suddenly going to solve all of our housing problems. However, if we solved our housing supply, it would take away the profit motive of hedge funds, because they are here to return profits to their investors. And if we had enough housing to go around, the rate of appreciation and everything would be such that those investors would find better investments somewhere else. But there are also some properties that only investors can buy because of their condition, because of the tax problems with them. And we don't want to do anything that further stigmatizes those properties or that keeps them vacant, or that causes issues for sellers. So it is a delicate dance here, and everything impacts everything else.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Delegate Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks to the bill sponsors and to this panel. Thank you for bringing your perspectives. I'm curious about hedge funds, because my understanding is that the objective of a hedge fund is to return profit to shareholders. And I think you said something just like that. I'm also somewhat familiar with the performance of hedge funds in our broader economy. There are a lot of famous stories about hedge funds. For example, the one that purchased Sears Roebuck. And I don't know how many of you have noticed this, but we don't have any more Sears Roebucks. I think a hedge fund was responsible for purchasing Montgomery Ward. Some of us grew up shopping at Montgomery Wards with our grannies, and there are no more Montgomery Wards. Some young people in this room probably never even heard of that retail chain. So I'm a little, just personally not entirely comfortable with the business model of hedge funds. I haven't seen examples where they actually delivered value to our economy, but where they rather very effectively enriched a few people. So that makes me nervous about the idea of hedge funds purchasing up our housing stock, our single-family housing stock. So is there anything you could say that would reassure me that it's in the state's interest to just allow the natural evolutionary, creep of hedge fund rapacious consumption of economic goods? Why I should oppose this bill, and because there's some benefit that would come. Can you help me, persuade me? Because I'm not persuaded.
Delegate, I don't represent hedge funds, and I'm not here to fight their battles for them. There are objective studies out there that show actual hedge funds that own properties are more likely to evict. They are less likely to make repairs because that cuts into that profit motive that they are, in fact, trying to return to their shareholders. Those are objective studies. They are out there. I've read them. I have no reason to disagree with them. But we do need to, I think, differentiate between some of our Maryland-based companies that offer rental housing and hedge funds, and that was part of our testimony here today.
And if I could respond as well, Delegate, if you go to page 7, there's a definition of hedge fund. But I almost feel like, it's like a dirty word. Oh, hedge funds are evil. This bill applies across the board, regardless if you meet the earlier requirements. I'm not aware that members of my client's trade association are, quote, hedge funds, unquote, but they do have members that are investors that buy these properties and then rent them out to people.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I do not see any additional questions. Okay, thank you. That concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 1428. We'll turn to House Bill 1077. Delegate Palafo, Maryland Fair Chance Housing Act. If you have a panel, please bring them up.
Mr. Chair, can I bring in my panel? Yes, please. Thank you. All right. Second bite of the apple here, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. For the record, Delegate Adrian Buafo here to present HB 1077, the Maryland Fair Chance and Housing Act. This bill is about second chances. Too often, returning citizens are denied the opportunity to rent a home, not because of who they are today, but because of mistakes they made in the past. HB 1077 addresses this by prohibiting landlords from asking about a prospective tenant's criminal history during the initial application process. Instead, background checks can only be conducted after a conditional offer has been made. Even then, decisions must be based on individual assessments, considering any mitigating factors. This bill also limits the look-back period to 3 years, acknowledging that people can and do change. These provisions ensure landlords can't issue blanket denials for outdated offenses. This legislation strikes a balance. It ensures fair access to housing while still allowing landlords to screen tenants. Background checks are still permitted, but decisions must be fair and based on the whole person, not just their past. Madam Chair, if I may, there are some folks from BUILD who are here who have been great partners in this coalition, and not all of them will be testifying today. But if I could ask them to stand for being here in solidarity with us on this issue. And thank you to them for being here. I'll end by saying this. I know this committee has deliberated on this issue for a long time. And I know this body truly believes in second chances. Not everyone's perfect. None of us are perfect. And people make mistakes. But the biggest thing we should do is not allow housing to be a condition to someone's mistakes in the past. And so, Madam Chair, members of the committee, I urge a favorable report on HB 1077, the Maryland Fair Chance and Housing Act. Let's give every citizen a chance to rebuild their lives here in Maryland.
Madam Chair, members of the Environmental and Transportation Committee, my name is Albert Turner of the Public Justice Center, coming in favorable for House Bill 1077. If I may just give an overview of how the bill would work and process. I know in our earlier time we did do a debrief kind of outlining how this would work, but I just want to kind of give a refresher on this, particularly for this bill. I think this bill does reflect how a number of other jurisdictions handle this type of cases, these type of cases. So in DC and New Jersey, this is something that has been commonplace. And so for the purposes of this process, an applicant who has a prior criminal record would apply as anyone else would. And what would happen first is the landlord would go through the other qualifications that the tenant needs to possess to get approved. So they would go through a credit report. They would go through the reference check if that's required. They would have to show pay stubs. They would have to show proof of employment, as most places do require in this way. Once they are approved and all of that checks out, they are given what is considered a conditional offer. What that means is that that's saying that you qualify for everything aside from a search of your criminal history. Once the conditional offer is given to that person, that is when the landlord is able to inspect the criminal record. The criminal records that they are allowed to look at is limited. So for a lifetime look-back period, right now the bill has first-degree murder, has a registration in the lifetime sexual offender list, as well as human trafficking. If there are convictions that are within the 3-year look-back period, there are also convictions in there that they can look at, such as, if I can really quickly, child pornography, kidnapping, arson, as well as some others in there with a 3-back look-back period. And with that, that allows for them to be able to reassess if they need to, and it gives them a fair chance. So I thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is David Wheaton. I'm an attorney with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Founded by Maryland's own Thurgood Marshall, LDF is the nation's premier racial justice civil rights legal organization. Maryland House Bill 1077 will ensure that thousands of Marylanders with a history of involvement with the criminal legal system have fair access to housing. House Bill 1077 has the ability to positively impact public safety by providing thousands of Marylanders with the opportunity to find safe and quality housing. Due to discriminatory policies and practices at every stage of the criminal legal system, Black people are disproportionately subject to arrests, prosecution, and incarceration. Black people in Maryland make up 31% of the state's residents, but 52% of the people in jail and 69% of the people in prison. Currently, there are extreme barriers to access safe and quality housing for Marylanders with a history of contact with the criminal legal system. A survey found that nearly 8 out of 10 formerly incarcerated individuals reported ineligibility or denial of housing because of their conviction history. This legislation has the ability to help Marylanders with a history of involvement in the criminal legal system find safe and affordable housing, thousands of whom are Black Marylanders. Furthermore, landlords frequently rely on inaccurate, incomplete, and outdated court records to deny housing to people who have previous criminal records. Inaccuracies in criminal records also disproportionately impact Black people. The proposed legislation allows tenants to be able to provide evidence of any inaccurate information found on their criminal history screening report. With the rate of inaccuracies found in criminal reports, especially for Black residents, this will allow tenants more opportunity to challenge inaccurate information and help them secure housing. Finally, as a country that believes in second chances, every person in Maryland should have access to safe and affordable housing. This includes people who have prior involvement in the criminal justice system. We ask for a favorable report out of committee. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Thomas Anderson, and I'm representing BUILD, which is comprised of over 45 religious and nonprofit organizations, and Turnaround Tuesdays, which is a workforce development movement that has placed over 2,000 people in livable wage jobs. Over the past 2 years, we've listened to over 700 returning citizens, which makes up only a fraction of the Marylanders with criminal records. We asked them one question: what has been the biggest hurdle since returning home from prison? The overwhelming answer was housing. We've heard stories of landlords refusing to rent due to criminal records, hundreds of dollars wasted on application fees only to be denied or ignored. Many ended up in shelters in unsafe living conditions. Others fell into depression for a lack of safe housing. These systematic barriers promote structural inequality, disenfranchisement, discrimination, and marginalization, perpetuating cycles of poverty, homelessness, and recidivism. I too have faced discrimination. Despite having a good job, despite having a good credit rating, I still face discrimination because I had a criminal record. This housing discrimination has in effect become redlining 2.0, the landlord's edition. But in Jersey, they recently passed the nation's first bill banning housing discrimination based on criminal records. If they can do it, we can do it. They are not better than us. So let us pass a bill that proves that Marylanders stand for second chances and equality. I have one more thought for you two as I leave. Maryland's recidivism rate is 40%. Stable housing reduces recidivism by 40%. That is not a coincidence. It's a direct correlation. Housing is crucial to breaking the chains of recidivism. It should be a fundamental human right.
Testimony. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So powerful. Who's next?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Caroline Ioso, and I'm a senior program associate with the Opening Doors Initiative at the Vera Institute of Justice. Vera is a national organization working to end mass incarceration, protect immigrants' rights, and build safe, thriving communities. Today, I will testify in support of HB 1077, the Fair Chance Housing Act. Housing stability and public safety are linked. People who are formerly incarcerated are nearly 10 times more likely to be unhoused than the general public. In turn, people experiencing homelessness are 11 times more likely to be arrested. This bill will make all of Maryland's communities safer by allowing people with conviction histories to have the stability that comes with housing. There is no evidence that excluding people with conviction histories makes communities safer. In fact, most people with a conviction history in their past never have another one. A criminal background check provides information about a person at the time of their last conviction, but it says nothing about who they are today, including their progress during and after incarceration, for example, gains in education, employment, and stability. My team at Vera recently studied how policies similar to HB 1077 have impacted communities in Cook County, Illinois, New Jersey, and Washington, D.C., where fair chance policies have existed for several years. The study found that landlords in these jurisdictions have not experienced significant staff capacity burdens and have not reported any change in the safety of their communities, either for their tenants or their tenant-facing staff. Maryland deserves safety and justice, not one at the expense of the other. This bill delivers both. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to testify today, and we urge a favorable report on HB 1077.
Thank you so much. Is there any other individuals on your panel? Okay, at this time, we will take any questions. I see Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate, certainly understand the spirit of the bill, but I do have a particular question. Why would we want to limit the ability to know if someone is a child predator up front? I have 6 kids, and the way that the bill is constructed right now, that should be a non-starter. I think for many landlords that is going to be a non-starter. I don't want to move next door to a pedophile. I don't think any of us in this room want to. So the fact that we can't even ask that question, and then there's a second point in here that talks about the ability to only look if someone is on the lifetime registry. Well, some people do fall off that registry. They can still be on the active sex offender registry, and we can't even acknowledge that in here. I think it's after like 10 years or something like that, they fall off the registry. I think that there is a real dangerous precedent we could be setting here with something like this.
Delegate, I really appreciate the question. I think that's a really important point. I think that's also something that comes up in a lot of jurisdictions. So in theory, for your idea of someone being what you would refer to as a pedophile, not saying that they're not, but for this purpose, they would be on the lifetime sexual registration list. There is a tenure, but then there is also a lifetime. Right. And so if we're talking about someone who has shown habitual sexual assault, rape, habitually, they fall within the confines of the lifetime sexual registry list. They cannot fall off of that. And so if that is what you're looking for, you would be able to access that at any point during their lifetime. And so for the purposes of that is what would be addressed for that. In addition, for the purposes of this, when we're talking about recidivism and also homelessness, we want to make sure that people are housed in some way or shape or form. I'm not saying that we want to make sure that they're living next to children, that they're living next to anyone, but they need to live somewhere, right? Because if they don't, they become homeless. Homelessness is expensive. for taxpayers, for everybody here. We want to make sure that people aren't homeless. And so the bill is structured in a way to make sure that for those who have committed those crimes that you are committing and they've been convicted, that is always something that can be inspected. That is not something that they can just roll off of, right? But at the same token, we need to understand that everybody needs shelter, because if not, they're more likely to commit those crimes again. It's homelessness, it's expensive, and so that's the balance that this bill strikes, in addition to DC and New Jersey and other jurisdictions.
May I have a follow-up? So why would we not want to just ask that up front? Why would we not want to know up front, right? Because I understand what you're saying, that someone is on a registry, but someone can be John Smith on a registry, right? There could be, hundreds of John Smiths on the registry. We want to know about this particular John Smith, right? Why would we not want to know up front? Say that the apartment building, for instance, is across the street from a school, so they wouldn't be able to live there anyway. Why would we not want to know that up front and not put the property owner through that whole process when we can just kind of rule that out right from the beginning? Why would we wait until after the fact, until we've gone through the application process and all that sort of thing? Why wouldn't we get that up front?
Right. So the purpose of the conditional offer is to make sure that they qualify for all the other requirements that are there. It just kind of separates the two in order to make sure there's clarity between why they're being denied and why they're not being denied. Not saying that they can't expect that ever, it's just saying that for the purposes of credit score, references, whatever, they're approved, and that is when you can inspect that criminal record. And the reason is just for clarity's sake, because on the back end, if you need to do reassessment, if the person needs to appeal or anything along the lines of that, they know exactly why they're being denied, and they have the clarity within that phrase, so they don't think it's their credit score, they think it's their references or anything along the lines of that.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Holmes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm interested in process. So an application is received, and the application does not have anything relevant to criminal history. Is that correct?
That is correct. No, at the initial application stage, there is no request to look at the criminal record. It's only after the conditional offer.
So at that point, whomever applies, there's nothing relevant to criminal history. So then I have to request or look for criminal history? How do I, what's the next step? What's step number 2?
So step number 2 would be the same way that the process works now. So after the conditional offers is done, however the landlord does the criminal record check, as they do now, they would still do the same. And so they would be able to look at that criminal record after the conditional offer, but it's just when it happens. It's a timing phrase instead of exactly at the point of the application process.
And Delegate Holmes, just to add some more context to what Mr. Turner is saying here, it's no different than the bill in that sense and process-wise that we passed many years ago when it came to criminal history and jobs, right? We're eliminating that box at the initial step, but folks still have the ability to go back in time and figure out what is there.
Thank you.
Just point of clarification. Great. I apply for an apartment. I have a job. Maybe I've had something 3 years, 4 years ago, but I apply, I pay. My credit check is done. Everything is done. Landlord says, great, we're going to offer you this apartment. We need to do the actual check. Then they do the actual check. They may see that I was, I'm currently potentially incarcerated for whatever the issues are limited on in the bill, and then from there they can say we accept or we don't accept. But if they don't accept, we know potentially why.
Correct.
And to Delegate Naraki's point, if I'm someone who is potentially on a lifetime list, I'm assuming, not saying someone may not, but I'm assuming there are places that I cannot be, and that somehow there's a geographical map where I know that I can't be at an apartment building across from a school or near somewhere else. There are some conditions that would limit my search, which unfortunately makes it a smaller search, but I would know where I potentially could and could not be.
Correct.
Isn't that so?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll call up the next couple of witnesses. I have a Shyam Washington, Zephyr Shaw, Victoria Lee, and Martin Mitchell. Can please come up. 1, 2, 3, and, oh, there we go. You may begin as soon as whoever's seated first can go.
My name is Shaheen Washington, and I'm a leader with Turnaround Tuesday. Turnaround Tuesday strongly supports the passage of HB 1077. Turnaround Tuesday is a workforce development movement which supports returning citizens in Baltimore City by providing job placement, social skills training, wellness resources, and housing assistance. While Turnaround Tuesday successfully connects returning citizens to career opportunities, housing remains the primary barrier beyond employment. Many share feelings of defeat, questioning the value of working hard only to be denied stable housing. Some, despite securing good jobs, are forced into having to accept some of the worst housing due to these barriers, leaving them to wonder, am I not worthy of a second chance when I'm doing everything right? But let me tell you my story. Growing up in Baltimore on the west side, I lacked access to resources, which pushed me to the streets to support my 6 younger brothers. At 18 years old, I was convicted and sentenced to 10 years serving 8 in prison. After my release, I committed to turning my life around, but the stigma of my criminal record made finding stable work difficult. In 2023, I landed my first job since release through Turnaround Tuesday and started rebuilding my life. Despite improving my credit and finances, I faced repeated apartment denials. Discouraged, my then girlfriend and I widened our search to Baltimore County and were approved for an overpriced apartment that we couldn't afford, but we had no other choice but to accept. Almost 2 years later, I'm now employed as the community engagement specialist for Turnaround Tuesday, and I work with Bill to advocate for reforms in the criminal justice system. Now engaged and expecting my second child in June, I'm preparing to move again. Despite my significant progress since my incarceration, I still harbor fear of being denied housing due to my criminal record. By acting this year, Maryland has the opportunity to ensure justice-impacted people have real second chances to rebuild their lives. By removing barriers to housing, we can create a path where returning citizens can contribute fully to their communities and thrive. One time, thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Vice Chair, members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. My name is Victoria Lee, and I am the Housing Services Case Manager at Healthcare for the Homeless, and I am in support of this bill. As a case manager for supportive housing, I assist and support individuals with diverse backgrounds and life circumstances in becoming productive members of society and regain the essentials of life through employment, education, healthcare, and establishing or reestablishing stable housing. 90% of which of my caseload does have a criminal record. Criminal records should not equate to deprived housing, as everyone deserves a home. Housing stability is most critical in regard to this bill because it can be the motive for a person's future successes and productively sustained lifestyles. Denying housing to citizens with criminal records is not only a form of discrimination, but denying housing can also lead to detrimental barriers and instability in every facet of a person's life, such as employment, physical and mental health, and food. Denying housing means denying a person the very basic necessities of life. Allowing landlords to deny housing to those with criminal records poses many barriers to people seeking housing stability, and it is wrong because it acts as a form of punishment to those who were already punished when they were incarcerated. In the course of my duties, I personally have witnessed the negative effects of clients being denied housing and the spiraling struggles this entails, starting with homelessness. Without a place for clients to go, people have struggled greatly or have been unsuccessful obtaining employment. Without employment, people are unable to create a healthy living, pay for transportation, purchase groceries, or even medications and co-pays for doctor's visits, which then affects their health, both mental and physical. I have also witnessed distinctive positive effects of clients who have been able to gain stable housing with criminal records. One individual in particular who was able to further his education, which allowed him to become employed full-time with a career, is now a volunteer, a part of other programs working to assist minors with records. He's also taken steps to start his own nonprofit organization, and lastly was able to regain custody of his children, providing them too with permanent stable housing. For these reasons, we ask that you support this bill. Thank you for your time.
Greetings. Greetings, Chair and distinguished members of the committee. I appreciate you guys for taking up this issue. My name is Martin Mitchell. I'm the former at-large councilman in the city of Laurel and the active NAACP member. But today I'm here as a dedicated advocate for criminal justice reform and a community organizer with life after release. Life After Release is a community-based organization, reentry organization that helps our brothers and sisters returning home, some while still in a carceral state. Life After Release is an organization that helps with court support, Court Watch PG, mutual aid, and overall providing a community of support and resources to our clients. This bill is extremely personal to me because one of my younger cousins has been incarcerated for several of his adult years, but fortunately, he'll be released this June. One of the things we talked about was housing. He talked about what opportunities are available to him and how he doesn't want to live at his mother's house or another family member's house forever. He wants opportunities. This is a critical piece of legislation that seeks to ensure that all individuals, regardless of their past, have an equal opportunity to secure stable housing. The Fair Chance in Housing Act addresses this by preventing landlords from automatically rejecting tenants solely based on their criminal history. This act is not about condoning criminal behavior. It is about recognizing the importance of second chances and offering individuals the opportunity to demonstrate their ability to lead a positive and a law-abiding life. Fair housing is a human right. Fair housing is a public safety issue. Don't our brothers and sisters returning home deserve the same opportunity and housing stability? While in the community, I have heard stories of individuals living in some unmanageable and unsafe situations because of the lack of housing options afforded to them. I hope that we, as a state, we can change this. So I implore the deliberative body to vote affirmatively for HB 1077, Fair Chance in Housing Act. Thank you.
Okay. Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee, my name is Zephyr Shaw from Maryland Legal Aid. We urge a favorable report on House Bill 1077. I want to provide some clarification on this bill in light of prospective changes to federal laws. Many of our clients are in federal subsidized housing or in public housing regulated by the federal government. This bill is not redundant with anything with any HUD regulations or HUD guidance. In fact, there are not HUD regulations or federal law as prescriptive as the procedure in House Bill 1077. What HUD has done is provided guidance both to the public writ large as well as to public housing agencies. In the first aspect, HUD's guidance has said that there can be disparate treatment evidence, discrimination in instances of blanket policies that use criminal history to disqualify an individual from housing, but no procedure in that guidance. Additionally, for public housing, guidance has suggested that there are best practices for public housing agencies to follow, such as not using one-strike screening policies, and instead allowing applicants to present mitigating circumstances, adopting look-back periods of 12 to 24 months for certain criminal offenses, and adopting assessment factors, such as the length of a conviction, recovery, rehabilitation, and whether an applicant's offense related to the safety of other residents. All those factors are actually in this bill. And so what this bill does is it gives a procedure and meaning to what federal law already prescribes, but without an actual regime to follow. Finally, this bill includes an important enforcement mechanism, which is that folks who are denied housing would have recourse with the Office of the Attorney General or through a Consumer Protection Act claim privately. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to call up the remaining individuals, Dennis Anderson, Darrell Davis, and Mitchell before we go to our regulars. Thank you all so much. You can begin as soon as you are seated.
Good afternoon. How are you, ma'am? Good afternoon to the members of the committee. My name is Darrell Davis. I am a real estate investor. I'm an entrepreneur and a proud graduate of Bowie State University. But I also am a formerly incarcerated individual released from the Maryland Correctional Institute of Jessup. In 2012, I was blessed with an opportunity to start my road to redemption and avoid recidivism. On this road to redemption, I was afforded an opportunity to acquire my bachelor's degree, as well as to start my first company and secure a commercial lease for my business. However, due to the unfair discriminatory practices in Maryland, I found myself still homeless, forced to live inside of my gym because I was unable to secure stable housing. I am standing here to ask you to vote in favor of SB 1077, not only to support individuals such as myself, but also to support the economy, because 22% of the working adults in Maryland have some previous incarceration record. I'm also asking that you support this bill, HB 1077, not only to support the economy, but the education system and our students. 67,000 students in the state of Maryland have some kind of parent with a former incarceration rate, and we all believe that our children deserve some place to stay. The final point that I ask that you vote in favor for HB 1077 is because it allows for a direct opportunity to fight against the housing crisis that is growing in Maryland by widening and opening the eligible applicants that can take on these housing opportunities. Thank you again for the opportunity. Please vote in favor of HB 1077.
Thank you. Good afternoon, esteemed members. Thank you for affording me the time to vocalize support for House Bill 1077, addressing the issue of fair and equitable housing for formerly incarcerated. I hold the position of Community Engagement Coordinator for the Maryland Office of the Public Defender. I created and oversee the reentry project for the MOPD. The project supports our clients by connecting them to social support services, providers, and resources to assist with daily living. One of the most, if not the most vital social support is housing. Housing requests account for over 1/3 of the referrals made to the reentry project and remains the most persistent barrier to reentry. As indicated in an article published by the Center for American Progress entitled "Strengthening Access to Housing for People with Criminal Records is Key to Successful Reentry," and I quote, "Long-term housing options require broader scale and capacity, as well as integration into existing private housing market. The vast majority of rental units in the United States are privately owned and run, with 38% owned by individual landlords and 40% owned by partnerships or corporations, indicating that successful reentry policies need to focus on the private rental market. One such policy would be to limit landlord screening processes and rental application denials based solely on criminal conviction. Since background checks disproportionately affect Black and Latino communities who are overrepresented in the criminal legal system, strengthening renter protections would also provide more equitable access to safe housing and help reduce racial disparities in homelessness, employment, and health. Our clients have been given move-in dates, paid application fees, only to be denied once the lack of credit and background check reports came back. Redemption isn't just a passive state, but an active pursuit that requires concrete steps toward improvement. It is for these reasons that we ask the esteemed body to support Senator Baffel's House Bill 1077.
Thank you so much. Stanley Mitchell? Okay. No, Stanley Mitchell, thank you so much. We go to our virtual witnesses. E.V. Yost, Bill Rights Maryland. Welcome to the committee. You may begin when you're ready.
You may begin when you're ready.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Evie Yost. I'm an attorney from Disability Rights Maryland. Disability Rights Maryland strongly supports House Bill 1077 because it aligns with our goal to end the unnecessary institutionalization and segregation of disabled Marylanders. It would do so by increasing housing opportunities and decreasing the potential for discrimination against renters with disabilities, who are more likely to have criminal histories and already face numerous barriers to accessing safe, accessible, and affordable housing. As you've heard from my colleagues, the disparate impact of criminal record discrimination is most significant for people of color, and that's especially true for disabled people of color. It's estimated that more than half of all Black people with disabilities in the U.S. will be arrested before they reach age 28, while only 15% of the general population is disabled. People with disabilities make up 40% of those currently experiencing incarceration and 23% of those on probation or parole in the U.S. This bill would promote housing security for people with disabilities who've had previous interaction with law enforcement due to conduct resulting from their disability. I've worked with countless adults with conditions like schizophrenia, autism, or PTSD, often invisible or behavioral health disabilities that can sometimes cause them to behave erratically or have difficulty controlling their behavior during interaction with law enforcement, which results in criminal records, which without context might lead a landlord to draw inaccurate conclusions about them as a prospective tenant. Without protections like House Bill 1077, people with disabilities are at risk of long-term homelessness or institutionalization due to their inability to access housing and the stigma associated with criminal records, which are often the result of benign or simply misunderstood behaviors associated with manageable medical conditions. Increasing access to decent, safe, and affordable housing for people with conviction histories will help ensure that disabled people have the opportunity to be fully integrated into all aspects of the community and to enjoy healthier and better qualities of life. For these reasons, we strongly urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Evie Yost. We will call up next on the virtual panel Jamar Russell from Life After Release. You may begin when you're ready.
Thank you all for having me. I'm testifying in favor of House Bill 1077. My name is Jamar Russell, as stated. I am a community developer in Prince George's County Behavioral Health Division of the Health Department. I work for Bridges to Success, where I mentor the youth. I also am a facilitator with the Chris Wilson Foundation, where we help the returning citizens. And I'm a publisher of my own company, where I produce work to aid those that's incarcerated. I'm also a returning citizen. I have served 12 years, and the dynamic impact that I've been able to make both in and out had to do with my personal development. Now, the reason why I'm in favor of this bill is because I know what a strong citizen or a good man, how that changes the environment. Right now, I'm able to actually mentor the youth to deter them from going there. So having the housing not only would give returning citizens like myself an opportunity to potentially be homeowners, but also teach others. And that's where the important and the impact of all of this will help, because now we're talking about impacting the community in a positive way, and also being a guide for those that are returning so that they know how to be productive tax-paying citizens. And that's the goal, right? We want to make Maryland better. We want to make our counties better. We want to make the country better. So that's why I'm in favor of this bill. I want to be able to have the opportunity not only to mentor the youth, but also those returning so that we can do better, so we can show better and change the environment for the young folks that are up and coming so they can have a better example instead of going into prisons and having the wrong ones like I did when I was young. So they say home ownership is the building block of wealth. Let's go ahead and prepare all of our young folks and returning citizens to be wealthy.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. We thank you for your testimony and your personal story. At this time, we will call up the favorable with the amendments. Ashley Clark, Brian Anlou from AOBA.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Ashley Clark here on behalf of the Maryland Multi-Housing Association. And I first want to start by thanking Delegate Boafo for speaking with us. And we want to acknowledge his concerns as well as ours regarding the barriers to housing, which is why our members do their best to try to not only work with individuals that are facing challenges, but I did want to highlight, based on our written testimony, a few of the amendments that we would like to propose for the bill. The first being the removal of the conditional offer. We believe that's an unnecessary two-step process, and we don't believe that rehabilitated individuals should have to go through multiple steps to gain access to housing. If we make the offenses plain at the outset, there aren't any surprises or letdowns. If we're talking about someone who has applied and then they qualify and then they have to go through the second step. The second thing is we think for the convictions, there should be a tiered system. Namely, as Delegate Naraki mentioned, we do think that for the sex offender registry and related offenses, it should allow a landlord to deny an application at the outset. And with the other listed offenses, which are outlined in my written testimony, we should have a 7-year and respectively a 3-year look back, again, outlined in my testimony. The last piece of this is the Attorney General's data collection and published information. Our members are fine with collecting the data, but not with publishing it, specifically because the legislation as it's written is silent in terms of the duration of the published information on the website. It isn't clear whether it's per infraction or after a certain number of complaints, and it doesn't define what's considered good faith compliance. So this is not a delay, not a denial, but it's a delay. We can't guarantee someone's safety, but we do have a duty to mitigate risk if they are known. And so we're committed to working with the sponsor. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Brian Anley with the Apartment and Office Building Association. Many AOBA members are proud to offer second chance housing to returning citizens. To that end, AOBA supports the disclosure requirements, individualized assessments, giving tenants the ability to challenge inaccuracies in their criminal history records, and some of the limitations on convictions that may be considered. However, AOBA has concerns about the conditional offer requirement and the look-back periods. Housing providers need to be able to screen prospective tenants for convictions that pose risks to staff and other tenants. That includes violent crimes such as assault, burglary, and fraud. Fraud includes things like writing or defrauding individuals, credit card and insurance fraud, and drug-related criminal activity excluding marijuana. Fentanyl, for example, or heroin, we are, after all, still facing a opioid crisis. We'd like to be able to screen for those drug-related convictions. This actually aligns with DC's criminal history screening law, and we believe that the 3-year look-back period is not sufficient. Speaking specifically to the look-back period, you'll find a testimonial link to a DOJ study that looked at a 9-year recidivism rate, and what it basically found is that more than half of returning citizens reoffend within the first 3 years, and then for those that did not, the other half that did not, another nearly half reoffend in years 4 through 9. And so we feel that the 7-year look-back period is adequate and going to give us the full scope of the prospective tenants' rehabilitation. And even with that look-back period, the landlord would still need to do the individualized assessment to consider rehabilitation. So with that, happy to work with the sponsor and find the right balance between protecting tenants and increasing housing options. We respectfully urge favorable report with amendments.
Thank you both so much. Delegate Long.
Thank you. Madam Chair, question for you. Thank you both, Ashley and Brian. How long and how far do you want to look back?
For which?
That's Mr. Anlou.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we agree with MHA and Ms. Clark's testimony on sort of a tiered structure, a 3-year and 7-year look-back period. We do think that 7 years is appropriate for some of the more serious crimes, things like murder, arson, certain degrees of assault, certainly sex offenses, those kinds of things. So we think a 7-year look-back period is more appropriate for, again, more serious offenses.
Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, if I may. So, Mr. Anlou, presently the General Assembly, especially the governor and others, are working with the myriad of criminal justice reform packages that are addressing expungements, PBJs, what can be concealed, what can be hidden. And we won't get into that. We're not judiciary. So, but I guess my question is, if the General Assembly is presently trying to analyze what is permissible, what is necessary to give people a chance to get their life back on track, how can you ask us on this particular committee and ask this body to say that a person that made a mistake 3 years ago and with the exclusion of sexual predators and you know, serious offenses in that respect, and I'll claim that as murder and sexual predators. There are people that are addicted to drugs that just maybe addiction crisis and mental health crisis, right? So how can we deny someone or prevent somebody the opportunity to have housing based upon an issue that may have been 3, 4, 5 years ago, and they have shown a track record of no offenses prior?
Well, again, Delegate, I'm not suggesting that the person automatically be denied. I'm suggesting that housing providers should be able to consider those convictions for longer periods of time, and that once you do the individualized assessment, you consider the factors that you mentioned, their rehabilitation, their track record of steady, stable employment, perhaps, you know, other things that, you know, that they are contributing and good member of society, then, you know, you can make a decision based on those things. But the way it's written currently, it would handcuff housing providers from being able to even consider those things for that period of time.
Madam Chair, lastly, my last point, let me say this, and it's a question, it'll come to a question, I promise you. All of us have done things that we regret. Everybody. All of us have a past. Some hide it better than others. Some can be found on case search, some cannot. And I just think that it's very unfortunate that this year this bill is brought back forth again, and we, beyond those who are sexual predators and those who have murder charges, that we can't find a way to ensure that anybody who is a Marylander has the opportunity to apply for housing and to be put forth without being held to their worst mistake. Isn't that so? Thank you.
Isn't that so? Delegate Healy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I wanted to ask both of you if you have an actual list of what you consider the quote-unquote serious crimes that you would want to be able to find out about, if there's a short list. I mean, if the list that's in the bill is too short in your opinion, can you give us a comprehensive list of what you consider absolutely necessary for your clients to be able to do business as they want to? That's the first question. Do you have a list?
Yes, Delegate, it's included in the written testimony.
Okay, I will look at your written testimony more closely then. The second question is, is on that list anything about stalking or domestic violence or anything along the lines of somebody that is, you know, something that might pose a danger to other tenants, or specifically somebody who's fleeing domestic violence situation and there's somebody who's looking for them and wants to become their next door neighbor?
I don't think that specific situation is covered in either of our lists. So I can't speak to that. Okay. I highlighted specifically things like, you know, assault as being a more serious crime. So potentially could be covered in some of what we're saying, but I'm not quite sure that specific scenario is covered.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Chair Boyce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first of all, I want to say thank you both for coming with amendments, because it's really important. I think this legislation is important, but I want to ask a couple of clarifying questions and get to the point I think not only advocates and the sponsors are trying to get to. I think the question for us is whether or not we believe that incarceration is rehabilitation. And also the question of whether or not when I have then been released, whether or not then I am quote unquote redeemed, and not essentially looked at as someone in most cases that is either still violent or still capable of killing somebody or still capable of robbing somebody. And so I think on one hand, I do understand maybe wanting to take a risk assessment beforehand, but wouldn't you say, or isn't it so that I think to the point of the conditional offer is to really create a record to see who in fact is discriminating against individuals who were otherwise essentially in society, have put themselves back into society to be good citizens, understanding what they have done, understanding that they certainly have been working to be redeemed, but they cannot continue to be redeemed if they cannot get housing, if they cannot be put on the right path. So wouldn't you say the conditional offer is a way to establish a record to see how folks are in fact being treated if they come out and if they have all the other qualifications other than that? 5 years ago, I'm in jail because I carjacked somebody, right?
Yeah, well, just in response, Delegate, thank you for the question. I think that what we're really trying, well, the intent in the amendment is to eliminate that additional step for that individual. But I understand what your question is. I think that when someone is applying for an apartment home, whatever the reasons are that you're denied, that's something that is outlined for you. And so I guess I would maybe disagree that, if someone were to receive, a denial of the application, that they don't know what the reasons are. And it may list, if it's that maybe you didn't qualify because there's some income guideline, but it can also be because of whatever is presented in your criminal background check. I don't think that it's just demonstrating you were denied based on income. I think it would have both listed there.
But I think the pairing out, I think what the sponsor and the advocates are trying to do is say, based on that conditional offer, if you know everything else about me, except for the fact that I was in jail 5, 10, whatever, how long ago, or, the 3 years or whatever, how long the look back is, I believe it's 3, I would otherwise be qualified. And if then I'm not accepted, it's like, okay, it's because I had this record, although I am not this person or not who I was.
Understood. But I guess I don't want to ask a question.
No,
but,
you're fine.
My concern is that's something that could just be addressed at the outset when you apply for the apartment home. So why create that additional or that delay in whether or not you are either going to qualify or be denied that application?
And would housing providers be open to refunding individuals who've been then rejected? I mean, if I have to put in $10, $20, $100 every time I have an application and then are always rejected because potentially I can assume maybe it's my background or I can assume it's my credit, but if I haven't been able to establish credit, like how can I, is that something that folks are willing to do, is just return these folks money? They can reinvest their money into somebody else. Maybe the next one will be yes.
I think that's something we can take back.
And then I had a follow-up question for you. You said something about, I can't read my handwriting. You were talking about the three-year look back, and you talked about that the 7-year look back was better, but you talked about, you spoke about some numbers you had showing recidivism. Can you repeat that number you talked about?
Yeah, so the Department of Justice took a look at recidivism rates over a 9-year period. They published a study in 2018. There's a link in my testimony, and basically what they found is that within 3 years, a little more than half of returning citizens reoffend.
That was the question
and then the half that do not reoffend, an additional half of that. So now we're talking about maybe somewhere around 2/3 of the original population reoffend within years 4 through 9. And so that's why we feel that 7-year period is.
So that's the question I had. Does the report say why for those first 3, like why there was a recidivism? Right, there's just but
does the Department of Justice report say? It does not. It does, however, say that more often than not, a person who was initially convicted for a violent crime reoffends with another violent crime. So it
doesn't say why, right? It doesn't say because I couldn't get a job or I couldn't get a house. Does it say why?
To my knowledge, no, it does not.
Okay, that's
no,
what
it just
I
looks at the
wanted to know.
rates.
Thank
No.
you.
Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to see you both. I do want to kind of dig a little bit deeper off of my line of questioning earlier about this sex offender stuff, because I'm really concerned about folks that fall off the registry, right? I mean, we know that after 10 years you fall off the registry, but that means that someone could actively be on a sex offender registry, and you all could do nothing to deny that applicant. So I want to understand, as a tenant, what would my rights be? If I found out that a child predator has moved next door to me, can I get out of my lease at that point?
You would have to give notice.
Right, so I would be stuck in my lease with a child rapist potentially right next door to me at that point, right?
Potentially.
If something happened in that circumstance, if that individual did something to one of my children, could I sue you all for that?
You probably, that tenant may.
Under the bill as drafted, actually, no. It provides some level of indemnity to the housing provider. I'll have to find the specific line, but it basically says something along the lines of if a person was with a criminal background was offered housing, then the housing provider cannot be held liable for anything that they do.
That's right, and that's how I read it as well. Is that there's no liability there, so I can't get out of my lease. Right, I have a child sex offender next to me. I can't get out of it. I've got to break my lease then at that point, and there's no liability there. So I have no course of action there essentially. Isn't that so? I'll just leave it there.
Delegate Holmes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Chair, I'm so sorry.
Mr. Chair changed.
I can't follow the moving chairs here. Yes or no? Does someone fall off of the sex offender registry? Thank you. No, they don't know. They don't know. Thank you.
Okay. Any additional questions? Okay, we're going to turn to some unfavorable testimony. Bill Costelli on behalf of the realtors.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Bill Castelli on behalf of the Maryland Realtors and the property managers. My testimony today is unfavorable, but it actually is not much different from the panel that you heard before us in terms of the concerns that our property managers have. First, on the conditional offer. Secondly, on a tiered level of offenses that this bill sets forth, and whether it would make more sense to have a tiered level of offense for an earlier period for nonviolent crimes, a longer period for violent crimes. And again, one of the things that we want to stress is that all of these property managers, landlords currently follow these HUD guidelines. They have to look at the individual. They have to make sure that it is a demonstrable risk. That is the reason that they are actually turning someone down for housing. And so there are a lot of things that wouldn't be captured within that. And we think designing this bill to reflect that even more makes better sense. And for those reasons, we are unfavorable.
Thank you. Are there any questions for this witness? Okay, that concludes the bill here on House Bill 1077. We'll turn to House Bill 964, a very patient Delegate Crutchfield on behalf of the Montgomery County delegation, Task Force on the Displacement of Residents of Emery Grove. Would you mind just pulling one of the mics to you, Delegate?
I'm sorry.
Can you just pull one of the microphones to you so we can hear you? Thank you. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Hello, Mr. Chair and committee. I see the vice chair has already left for a few minutes. For the record, I'm Delegate Charlotte Crutchfield, and I'm here in support of HB 964. I represent District 19 in Montgomery County, where a thriving Black community called Emery Grove once flourished for over 100 years. It was its own self-contained neighborhood with a grocery store, barber shop, beauty shop, doctor's offices. But one of the few remaining places there right now is a historic church that is over 150 years old, and that's the Emery Grove United Methodist Church. It was known for its camp meetings, which were really spiritual revivals. So what happened to Emery Grove? Well, in Montgomery County, urban renewal happened to Emery Grove. The passage of the Housing Act of 1949 actually created what's known as urban renewal. It was actually started in order to rehabilitate different areas, in particular urban and suburban communities, where there appeared to be blight or slums. For Montgomery County, that meant Emery Grove. So the Montgomery County Council passed an ordinance back in 1958, which stated that all housing had to have in-housing sewer and piped water in the homes. At that time, Emery Grove actually had substandard living conditions. So there really wasn't any piped-in sewage. There wasn't any running water in these homes. And so the roads as well were structurally in disrepair, as well as there was no real electricity in a lot of the homes. So Emery Grove created an association, and that association was charged with actually tackling those issues in Emery Grove. But what happened is the Emery Grove Civic Association actually went to Montgomery County and to WSSC and asked whether the actual sewage and piped-in water could be actually created in the community. They were told because of the dilapidated conditions, that would not be possible, and that is what happened. So instead of Montgomery County, WSSC getting involved, what they did is they designated that Emery Grove would be one of the first places in Montgomery County to actually be structured and rebuilt through the urban renewal process. And so what that meant is there was an expectation that new housing would be created for folks in Emery Grove. They would be able to live and stay in their community until the housing was completed. And this was all estimated to be completed by around 1970. But in actuality, that didn't happen either. The relocation didn't happen, the housing didn't happen, and instead, the community was actually destroyed. About 82% of the existing housing was eliminated. It was behind, Montgomery County was behind in its construction by about 8 years. So by 1983, of the original 126 homes, only 17 remained. Why is this legislation needed? Well, it's needed because even though the goal was to provide water, sewage, and road improvements, the urban renewal project that took place in Emery Grove was not in the original spirit of the plan. Emery Grove, again, was the only community in Montgomery County to be completely demolished through the process and procedures of urban renewal, eminent domain, and also condemnation. This also removed much of the spirit and the heritage of Emery Grove. It was a close-knit community, and that doesn't exist anymore. So promises were never fulfilled. Instead, public housing was created there, and that occurred about 10 years later, along with the initial housing that people could actually buy. But by that time, the cost was so outrageously over what the original cost was supposed to be that people that were the original homeowners could never afford to live there again. So what I'm asking for is simply a task force that will review all the processes that occurred, all the procedures, look at the results, and figure out a resolution around this displacement of residents of Emery Grove. So for these reasons, I would request a favorable report on HB 964. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Delegate Crutchfield. Are there any questions for the sponsor? Okay, I don't see any, but you have some virtual witnesses. We'll start with Tim Warner, Heritage Emery Grove CDC Inc. Mr. Warner?
Yes, I'm here. I was trying to get my video working, but it's apparently not supposed to be working.
They should.
So my name is Reverend Tim Warner, and I am grateful for the opportunity to share with you today about Emery Grove. I represent Emery Grove United Methodist Church, where I've served as senior pastor for the last 11 years. I'm pleased to speak on behalf of and offer enthusiastic support for this House bill. I do so because of the lasting impact of the trauma of urban renewal and what it had on the town, but also on the people who live there, multiple generations of their offspring, and even on the new Americans who have now come from every corner of the globe to call Emery Grove home. After spending years doing the delicate work of relationship building after I arrived at the church 11 years ago, I held a visioning retreat with the leaders where we struck at the core of what I describe as a malaise that had fallen over the congregation that had caused it to have fallen into disrepair, organizational strife, and steadily declining membership. The people of the church, substantially comprised of up to 5 generations of the founding families of the town, were mourning the destruction of the community where their forebears were former slaves had built it. They lived there, had thrived there, and all of that was caused by urban renewal. In their narrative, they had been told by the government that the houses they owned were substandard, and that if they sold their land to the government would construct better houses that they would be able to purchase. So they sold their homes and land for pennies on the dollar to the government, and instead of houses that they could afford to buy and live in, they priced out of purchasing homes that were eventually built and received instead lots of Section 8 multifamily dwellings that they could rent and not own, and a new recreation center and a pool. The physical community they had built largely with their own hands, the businesses that they had created against all odds, and the life they had lived together were all destroyed. And for generations now, the community has been left to live out traumatic narrative caused by intentional concentration of poverty where community used to be. To be clear, there was first the trauma of slavery, then Montgomery County's version of Jim Crow, then urban renewal. This is a repeated pattern of trauma across generations of people, and the result had been the slow death of the only remaining community institution in Emery Grove, the church. At that same retreat, we formed a vision to rebuild a community on the land that we owned or would attain, to restore families, to welcome our new neighbors to a community that had the ethic of the old one. And we have spent the balance of that time purchasing land and forming the Heritage Emery Grove Community Development Corporation, which is a leading partner in the redevelopment of the town currently. The Heritage Emery Grove Development Project will eventually feature more than 550 units of housing across a full range of affordability, where we're working with every branch of state and local government. I just want this last thing. The question remains, however, particularly as we are but one of 40 foundational communities in Montgomery County that have been negatively changed forever by the government action. What really happened during the period of urban renewal? Who benefited and who did not, and why? We applaud Delegate Crutchfield for seeking answers to these questions through this House bill, and for asking all of us as a community, what can we do to fix this horrendous problem? Thank you very much for the time.
Great. Thank you, Reverend. We'll turn to Stephanie Killian.
Just one second. There we go. Hi, my name is Stephanie Killian. I'm speaking in support of House Bill 964. I worked for Montgomery County government from 1985 until I retired in 2021. For most of that time, I worked at the Department of Housing and Community Affairs, and I was the Housing Division Chief when I retired in 2021. The Department of Housing and Community Development, as the agency was known when I started with Montgomery County government, was the agency that implemented the Emery Grove Urban Renewal Plan, beginning in the late 1960s and through the 1970s. By the time I joined the department a decade later, departmental staff and leadership had already acknowledged that the Emery Grove Urban Renewal Plan was a failure. Everyone recognized that the county had taken a strong, residential, mostly owner-occupied community and replaced it with very low-income subsidized rental units. I became interested in Emery Grove in around 1988 when I was assigned the task of revisiting many of the neighborhoods identified in a 1969 report. The Emery Grove I visited in 1988 was not a thriving residential neighborhood as it had once been. Instead, it was a depressed area comprised of very low-income rental housing, drug activity, and high crime levels. The community was gone. Over the years, I have researched and done a lot of research about Emery Grove. And what I've found is that Emery Grove is the only instance where Montgomery County used urban renewal in a residential neighborhood to undertake the wholesale demolition of owner-occupied homes. I support House Bill 964, which will establish a task force to assess how urban renewal caused the displacement of residents in Emery Grove. A comprehensive study of the causes and effects of urban renewal in Emery Grove has not been written, and it is time that we document the actions taken and identify remedies. Thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Great. Thank you both. Seeing no questions, that concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 964. Thank you, Delegate Crutchfield. We'll turn to House Bill 990. Delegate Watson, municipal appointees and employees, financial oversight, required education and experience. And just wait a second till those mics light up, please.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman and Vice Chair Boyce and esteemed members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. I'm Delegate Courtney Watson, House Chair of the Joint Committee on Management of Public Funds, and I'm here to present House Bill 990. The purpose of 990 is straightforward. It ensures that individuals serving in financial oversight roles within our municipalities possess the necessary education, experience, and ongoing training to perform their duties effectively. The provisions are essential for safeguarding taxpayer dollars and enhancing transparency and accountability in local governments. Maryland has 157 municipalities. Collectively, they manage substantial public funds, often responsible for essential services as public safety and infrastructure and community programs. Unfortunately, lapses in oversight, inconsistent auditing practices have led to cases of fiscal mismanagement, as documented by recent reports of the Department of Legislative Services Office of Legislative Audits. For example, in July 2023, 19 municipalities failed to submit their required audit reports for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2022, and several also were missing the prior year filings. Such gaps not only compromise transparency, but heighten the risk of errors or fraud. House Bill 90 mandates that appointees and employees responsible for municipal finances meet basic baseline educational and professional criteria. We want to make sure that we have qualified and competent individuals overseeing the management of public funds. The bill also establishes requirements for continuing education. The legislative auditor will monitor compliance and including this information in annual reports to further promote accountability. House Bill 990 also positions Maryland as a leader in financial governance by aligning the practices with national standards such as those recommended by the Government Finance Officers Association. I urge this committee to support House Bill 990 with a favorable report.
Thank you, Delegate. Any questions for Delegate Watson? Okay, thank you. We have an unfavorable witness, Bill Jorsch with Maryland Municipal League.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Bill Jorsch with the Maryland Municipal League today in opposition to House Bill 990. We see this bill as a heavy-handed, one-size-fits-all approach that simply does not work for all of our members. This would apply to all municipalities, those that are large, full service with professional staff like Annapolis, Laurel, La Plata, and Greenbelt, to the smaller towns with limited staff that oftentimes rely heavily on volunteers, such as Glen Echo, Crisfield, and Rockville. This is also a relatively unprecedented intrusion of the state into local personnel matters. I don't know of any instance where there is, where the state mandates certain certain education or prior work experience requirements for municipal employees. The only exception I can see is for law enforcement officers, which obviously have specific training for that occupation. And as I mentioned, the state already requires annual audits that come with pretty severe penalties for years of noncompliance, and that is the withholding of state funds. This could be HURs, highway user revenues, or police aid. Those are providing the guardrails that will identify the instances of any sort of financial impropriety. They are there to build public trust and provide government transparency. For those reasons, we ask for an unfavorable report on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Do some municipalities have city attorneys?
Almost all of them, either in-house or with a third-party law firm.
Okay, might they require some kind of particular kind of education and background for a city attorney, like a law degree?
Fair enough, yes.
Okay. Any further, Delegate Foley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And wouldn't it also be true that a firefighter or an emergency technician, or an EMT might also require some training, correct?
Fair enough. There's only 5 municipal fire departments in the state, though, so yes,
okay.
but that's a very limited scope.
But anyway, my question is, the sponsor of the bill cited several instances where municipalities did not submit their reports, required reports. What would be your, how would you enforce getting those reports from the municipalities that didn't submit them?
From the league's perspective? How would MML enforce this?
Well, I mean, what would be your proposal to enforce? I mean, if we,
So currently, if they're, I believe if they're 3 years out of compliance, then there is an option to withhold state funds from these municipalities. That's a pretty significant penalty that's hanging over them. I think that has, I understand that there are several that may be a couple years in compliance, but there are, I'm not sure if there are any that reach that 3rd year mark where the hammer really kicks in.
Okay, thanks.
Any Delegate Holmes?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would you be opposed to any education requirements at all?
Conceptually, maybe not. I just would need to further understand what those would be.
Thank you.
Further questions? Delegate Healy.
Just along the same lines, we've seen a lot of municipalities have had problems getting their audits done timely and other problems that they've had with finances over the last several years. And is there anything that you would recommend or you would support that would help address those problems, which this, having a level of professionalism in the financial management of our municipalities seems like an important thing to do at this time?
Agreed. And yes, so I can tell you that some of those that are having difficulty with their audits is a cost-related issue. There are some municipalities where the audit is taking up a quarter to a third of their budget. This is a real financial problem. Not trying to say that we're recommending getting rid of audits. I don't think that's a good idea at all. It's a tool that obviously needs to be in place. There are a couple other pieces of legislation in the General Assembly that we are working with the sponsors on ways to make it easier for municipalities to do their audits. There are certain documents that need to be provided currently that are causing for the increased cost for auditors to do the audits, and we're looking for ways to maybe facilitate that or ask for, perhaps the Office of Legislative Audits, if there's a way to involve them in some way to helping out some of our smaller members.
Let me just ask, I really didn't want to get off on audits. The question was the need for a level of professionalism in the management of our municipalities, which this bill is seeking to. Are you working with the sponsor on this bill?
No, I reached out to their office last week and we have not had a chance to connect yet, no.
Okay, well, I encourage you to do that. Thank you.
Okay.
Any further questions on the bill? Okay, thank you. That concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 990. We'll turn to House Bill 335, Delegate Grammer, Baltimore County Nuisance Actions Community Association.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do not have a panel. With your permission, I'll get started. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Delegate Robin Grammer here to present House Bill 335. House Bill 335 alters the qualifications used to determine standing for community associations when seeking judicial relief for nuisance actions in Baltimore County. This was originally Senator Sidnor's bill, which I went on to sponsor in the House. This bill has passed both the House and the Senate, but not in the same year. This section of code was enacted in 1997 in response to growing problems of community blight in Baltimore County. Our county was one of several to put in place similar language to deal with community blight issues. However, the current language of this section is prohibitive to functional use of the statute. Specifically, the household dues and bonding requirements under this code make the code impractical and out of step with how modern community associations work. Most communities have found it dysfunctional to have legitimate concerns dismissed for lack of standing. This bill almost identically mirrors changes adopted to the Baltimore City Code, which has found these revisions to be appropriate and effective. Baltimore County has growing problems with community blight. Most frequently, these deleterious issues are related to neglected properties, trash, and rats. One problematic actor can create a huge problem for a street or a community. The bill passed the full House in 2018, the full House in 2019, the full Senate in 2020. It has one small change on page 2, line 28, which pluralizes buildings, and that is the correct name for the buildings and housing section of the Baltimore County Code. With that, thanks for the opportunity to present House Bill 335. I'd be happy to take questions, and I'd ask for a favorable.
All right, thank you, Delegate. We have a question from Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate, good to see you. Just clarification, what happened in this bill last year?
So we talked to a lot of folks. There was some opposition. I believe the housing folks opposed the bill. And what their suggestion was to create a statewide bill, to make my bill a statewide bill. But I had a problem with that, because what that would essentially do is it would wipe out the sections for Baltimore City, Howard County, Harford County, and Prince George's. And frankly, I wasn't comfortable with using my bill to wipe out all the other jurisdictional-based standing statutes, which seem to be functional for those jurisdictions. And I think the argument was, well, there were problems with it. And I think what this committee should remember and ask yourself is problems for whom? And the problems are for, frankly, the bad actors. The bad actors for which we need this code. Those folks, yeah, they have to deal with these kind of problems, but if they dealt with them in the first place, we wouldn't be here. So I would resist an effort to make this a statewide bill and wipe out all the other tools for all the other counties. And I think we still need desperately a mechanism for, frankly, our more poor communities to deal with these types of issues. And that's why Baltimore County continues to send this bill as drafted year after year on a bipartisan basis.
Thank you, Delegate.
Delegate Healy.
Thank you very much. Delegate, is this bill modeled on any of the other local bills?
Baltimore City. And you have to forgive me, I know this is section 14.125 of the real property article, so it might be section 14.124, might be Baltimore
That's okay.
City.
I just wanted to know if it was modeled on any of the other local bills. That's what.
Almost identical.
Thank you.
Any further questions for the sponsor? Okay, thank you. We have some unfavorable testimony. Christopher Mudd, Venable, Nick Manis, Canning and Associates, and Bob Enton, Maryland Building Industry Association. You just go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Nick Manis here representing NAIOP. You have written testimony from NAIOP from Tom Ballantyne. He was unable to be here today. I've invited Christopher Mudd on behalf of NAIOP to testify on this bill. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, members of the committee. My name is Christopher Mudd, and I'm here this afternoon on behalf of NAIOP, a commercial real estate trade association. I'm pinch hitting for Mr. Tom Ballantyne, who had to testify elsewhere at this time. NAIOP is here in opposition to House Bill 335. This bill asks you to first accept the notion that code enforcement by Baltimore County is grossly ineffective, and second, that citizen suits are the best solution. NAIOP members do not accept either premise and generally believe improvements to code enforcement should take place within the framework of establishing Baltimore County Code and be implemented by county agencies. There are other specific concerns about the bill. The bill expands standing beyond nuisances by adding activities regulated under Article 35 of the Baltimore County Code. And what that does is it brings in the challenge of building permits into this bill. And building permits are currently not appealable under the Baltimore County Code. The County Council has determined to not permit appeals of building permits. This provision in this bill turns that local prerogative on its head. The bill also appears to expand standing for issues relating to adequate storm drainage that may open doors to challenges of stormwater management. NAIOP is concerned that the new language may facilitate challenges to projects that rely on general stormwater permit on the general stormwater permit, which proceeds upon a notice of intent rather than a permit. The bill also goes too far in expanding the qualifications for standing, and it sets up a system ripe for abuse. The bill removes requirements that an organization demonstrate local support before it qualifies for standing. Without membership criteria, county associations are permitted to self-define areas they represent, and this could set the stage for more than one organization to claim representation of the same geographic area. Finally, the bill repeals the requirement that an organization be in existence for more than 1 year before petitioning the court. This allows entities to be hastily formed for the sole purpose of litigation. For these reasons, we ask this committee to recommend unfavorable. Thank you.
Great. Can you just help me understand, Baltimore City has something like this? I don't know the bill as well as the sponsor. Can you just explain why this is so bad when Baltimore City apparently has something quite similar?
Sure. So the Baltimore City section is section 14-520, sorry, let me get it right. 14-123, and Baltimore County is in 14-125. While it's true that it is very similar, there's actually one quite important difference, and to cut my testimony short, I omitted it, but it is in our written testimony. And that difference is that before anybody can actually bring an action like this in Baltimore City, the city must first act, and there must be 75 days of non-action by the people who are in violation before a citizen could then bring their own suit. And that's a very important difference that's not in this bill.
Great. So if we harmonize that provision, that would remove your opposition?
I can't say that myself sitting here. As I said, I'm here on behalf of Mr. Valentine, and there's also a committee that we'd have to take that to, so I'd need to take it back to the committee.
Okay, you might want to run that by him. Delegate Naraki?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do want to ask a question about one particular part that you just talked about there about multiple organizations having standing. It's my understanding that already happens with certain things in Baltimore County. Aren't there neighborhoods where you might have a chamber of commerce, you might have a community association, you may even have some sort of like roundtable, like a business roundtable or things like that where all represent a particular area, and in the eyes of the county, at least with respect to certain processes, that they all have standing. So why, if that's okay there, why would that be a bad thing here?
Understood. And I think really the greater concern, more so than the overlapping, is the fact that someone currently under the law, it would take at least a certain amount of time for an organization to be established. And this would completely eliminate that requirement. So basically, the principal concern is that some people could come along and say, we represent this area, whether they do or they don't, because there's no requirement that they actually demonstrate that. Set up an organization really for the sole purpose of suing somebody. And there's real concern about that from our group.
So then if we had a time period or something that harmonized those concerns you have there, would you be okay with the bill then?
I can't, same answer I gave as before, so I can't say personally, but I can certainly take it back to our committee.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I'll just repeat what I just said. You might want to do that. Any additional questions? Okay, one more time. Is Mr. Enton here? Okay, that concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 335. Is Delegate Roberts here? Delegate Roberts, House Bill 1041, Homeowners Associations Reserve Funding Requirements Exemption.
Actually, Mr. Chair, I wanted to know if we could start with HB 1093 because my virtual witness is under some time constraints, if that's possible.
Yeah, go ahead with 1093.
Okay.
House Bill 1093, Small Landlords Eviction Relief Act.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and distinguished colleagues of the Maryland House of Delegates, Environment and Transportation Committee. For the record, I am Delegate Denise Roberts, proudly representing District 25 in Prince George's County. I come before you today for the first time to respectfully request a favorable report on House Bill 1093, the Small Landlord Eviction Relief Act, a critical piece of legislation designed to support small landlords while ensuring continued access to affordable rental housing for tenants who face credit and income challenges. Too often, discussions around housing policy center on large corporate landlords, leaving small independent property owners who form the backbone of our rental housing market without the same protections or consideration. House Bill 1093 does not seek to penalize tenants, but rather to acknowledge and address the unique hardships faced by small landlords. Unlike large property management companies, small landlords frequently take on greater risks by renting to tenants who may not meet rigid credit or income criteria. Many of these tenants are hardworking individuals who may have experienced financial setbacks, fluctuating wages, or lack the traditional credit history required by corporate leasing policies. Without small landlords, these tenants would have even fewer options for stable housing. Small landlords serve as a crucial safety net, often working one-on-one with tenants to keep them housed, negotiating payment plans, and providing flexibility that corporate landlords simply do not. However, the financial challenges they face are real. Many small landlords own a few properties, relying on rental income to pay mortgages, property taxes, and maintenance costs. When policies designed for large-scale rental companies are indiscriminately applied to these small property owners, the consequences can be devastating, not only for landlords, but also for the very tenants we seek to protect. Why HB 1093 is necessary. If we fail to recognize the differences between large and small landlords, we risk driving small property owners out of the rental market entirely. When small landlords are overburdened with onerous regulations, lengthy eviction processes, and financial losses, they cannot absorb the result is clear. They sell their properties or stop renting to tenants with credit or income challenges altogether. And this leads to, one, a reduction in available affordable housing as small rental properties are converted into owner-occupied homes or sold to large corporate investors. Stricter rental qualifications as remaining landlords become more risk-averse, leaving vulnerable tenants with even fewer housing options. An exacerbation of Maryland's housing crisis, particularly for low-income families, seniors, and individuals working to rebuild financial stability. House Bill 1093 seeks to strike a fair balance, ensuring that small landlords are not unfairly burdened while continuing to protect tenants' access to housing. In conclusion, I think it would be very important to note, in Maryland, there are 767,443 rental units, with only 11% being subsidized. Single rental dwellings make up less than 10% of the state's rental market, which makes small landlords on par with Maryland's subsidized housing. I'm going to skip to the next paragraph. I am aware of the Department of Housing and Community Development's opposition to the bill. However, if the state of Maryland truly values dignity, then maybe we should be focused more on developing more affordable housing instead of sending small landlords into foreclosure. I agree that eviction is humiliating, but so is foreclosure, and the damages from foreclosure can be more difficult to recover from. If the average renter is behind in their rent by $6,000, it is easier to recover from than a small landlord trying to recover from a $350,000 foreclosure debt plus $6,000 loss and all other foreclosure fees. We must take action to support the small landlords who provide vital housing opportunities across our state. By passing HB 1093, we can create a fairer, more sustainable rental market, and one that keeps small landlords in business and preserves housing opportunities for those who need them. I am respectfully urging this committee to issue a favorable report on House Bill 1093. Thank you for your time and thoughtful consideration, and I welcome any questions that you may have. But I would also like to say that I have already been in discussions and working with Delegate Holmes on this bill to see if there's any way that we can work through it together. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Is Miranda Carrington's on your panel, right? So we should call her up?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Why don't we have Miranda Carrington, and then we'll take questions. Ms. Carrington?
Hello, am I audible?
We can hear you. Please go ahead.
Hi, again, my name is Miranda Carrington, and I am in support of House Bill 1093. In my testimony, I wrote that my support stems from my recent experience as a landlord. I own a single property home, and this is in Germantown, Maryland. I want to inform that I am part of Montgomery County. And I had a lease for December 23rd to the 24th. Unfortunately, and this is going through looking for someone to rent the property through an actual real estate agent. So I found an individual and gave them a chance inside the home. Again, their lease started in December. The last payment I received was in March. Despite numerous attempts and considerations and patience, I decided to pursue the eviction process in June, and this is where I ran into the law. I learned that there was various items in place that prohibit me as a landlord from moving through a expeditious eviction process. From that, I gave the 10-day stay notice that my intent was to file for an eviction. Unfortunately, I filed that in June, and I did not get a court date until September. That's several months passed. And by the time this all was done, the eviction was scheduled. And from that eviction process, I learned there was numerous items that I had to accomplish. One being a woman. I had to have 20 able-bodied people to move. I had to rent a rental truck. I had to get packing material. I had to get boxes for fragile items. Not knowing how many fragile items, I had to accomplish a guessing game of how much they had in there and be able to do this within 1 hour, pack up a single home. It cost a lot of money, not just to file, but what I was behind when I went to court, I had about $22,000 in debt from their lease. From that, the deductions, the deposits, anything that the judge discounted as we just heard, large corporations. I don't have that much money, but all
Thank
in
you.
all.
Thank you so much for your testimony.
Yes.
We appreciate it. We do have some questions. Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, Delegate.
Hello, Delegate.
So I have a question. So you referenced, Delegate, the written testimony of the Department of Housing and addressed one part of it, but there's a part in there that you did not address, and that is the testimony points out that there was a ruling, a court ruling regarding in Baltimore that ruled it was Todman versus the mayor and city council of Baltimore. The court ruled that Baltimore City's abandonment of the ordinance similarly styled to this bill violated tenants' constitutional rights by depriving them of due process to get their property. Do you have a response to that?
Due process means that they didn't go to court. If they went through the eviction process, they went through the due process. But I'm not an attorney either, so yeah. I won't pretend to know all of the legal terminology and all that.
Well, I mean, in reading their testimony, it does seem to me that what they are referring to, because they reference another bill that's actually been before this committee, is not with respect to going to court to start eviction proceedings, but their right to the personal property. So, I don't know if you have looked at that issue. Or...
Sure. So we're not trying to keep them from collecting their personal belongings. They have every right to get their personal belongings. They get notified. I know in Prince George's County, there's a process for the eviction process, and landlords go to court. If the landlord wins, the court issues a writ of restitution. The writ of restitution gives the tenant time to remove their belongings. The sheriff executes the writ of restitution and moves the tenant's belongings out. And even in Prince George's County, I can tell you, landlords must rent a dumpster or hire someone to haul the tenant's property away. But we still, but it seems like the property, once an eviction goes through, in order for someone to maintain their investment property, they need to be able to turn that property over. But the intent of the bill is not to keep someone from getting access to their belongings.
May I follow up with another question? So maybe I'm misreading the bill, but I thought that the idea here of the bill was to prohibit a local jurisdiction from requiring landlords to cover the removal of personal property. And so my question is, and this was noted by Mako and others, second question is, so who would be responsible for moving that property off of, for example, a public right-of-way or, off the sidewalk? Somebody, if the tenant can't do it, and the landlord and the local jurisdiction is prohibited from requiring the landlord to do it, who then would be responsible for doing that?
To address your previous comment, the intent of the bill is so that all of the undue financial responsibility doesn't have to fall on the landlord. With respect to who's going to take it away, again, I'm still in discussions with Delegate Holmes and how we can possibly work through that. I can tell you that in Prince George's, so I know that there was some controversial language in the bill because I did have a conversation with the Speaker's office, and it was this statement about just dumping it onto the right-of-way. Maybe that language should have been left out. I can just tell you that in Prince George's County, that's what happens. It was the normal process. So, and usually in Prince George's County, bulk trash comes. The tenant comes and collects some of their things. And they have a certain amount of days. But I also know that in Montgomery County, they're required to put it on the public right-of-way. And then in Montgomery County, they have a certain number of days. If the tenant has not come back to collect their things, the landlord is required to come and pick it up, and I don't even know what they're supposed to do with it after that.
Okay, but I am confused because you said it's not that the landlord would not be financially, that the financial responsibility for that would not fall on the landlord under this bill.
Correct.
So whose financial responsibility is it? Assuming that the assumption here is that the tenant can't, right? Because they don't have the wherewithal. So whose responsibility would it be?
Well, that is a question to be desired, okay? So in Prince George's County, if there are items that are left that are abutted to the property, not even to the county public right-of-way, but just to the property, the county has services like bulk trash that comes and picks up things. And yes, the landlord is not going to just leave the things sitting there after a certain amount of time, because they have to, again, turn over the property, make the property look beautiful and pleasing so that they can rent it out to someone else. So the point of the bill is really just to address Ms. Carrington's issues. So, she had to pay 20 people to come and move, and Montgomery County requires that. And she had to pay for all of the moving and packing materials and rent a certain size truck or what have you. These are things that maybe larger apartment buildings may be able to have, but smaller landlords don't have those kind of resources. And the image that I believe that is, or the perception I believe that some people have, is that small landlords are rich. Not all landlords have a lot of money. Some small landlords, they buy property so that they can pass it on to their children or their grandchildren, or so that they can have a way to pay for these expensive tuition costs to go to college for their kids, But if there are constant, and this is just one avenue, and if every time someone finds an avenue to be able to maneuver through this world or this thing called life, something comes in and hinders that. Okay. And that's all I'm trying to redress. So I'm just kind of hoping that we can kind of work on this together. I'm very open to any kind of amendments or something that's just make it a little bit more equitable, because I understand that it is unfortunate when people have to go without housing, but it is also unfortunate if a small landlord has to lose their property.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, Delegate. So I think you may have partially answered my question, but let me start by saying, have you been at the scene of an eviction when somebody's property was put out on the sidewalk?
I have driven past.
Okay, but you haven't actually been there with the person. I was this summer called to a scene of an eviction for somebody I know, a disabled woman on the sidewalk, surrounded by her belongings as people pick through her belongings, taking everything. So I'm totally sympathetic to the plight of small landlords. My dad was one. He had a house that my brother lived in and that he then rented out. And I know the pressures are really difficult on small landlords. But, you know, I guess my question really is about the part where it says the personal property of the tenant shall be deemed abandoned and may be placed in a public right-of-way abutting the property. And I think from your comments, you're saying you're open to amending that out. Is that?
Of course.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions on this bill? Okay, that concludes House Bill 1093. We'll turn back now to House Bill 1041, Delegate Roberts, Homeowners Association's Reserve Funding Requirements Exemption.
Thank you, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and distinguished colleagues of the Maryland House of Delegates Environment and Transportation Committee. For the record, again, I am Delegate Denise Roberts, representing District 25 in Prince George's County, and I'm here to respectfully request a favorable report for House Bill 1041, a critical piece of legislation aimed at supporting the financial stability and resilience of our homeowner association communities. Earlier this year, I was contacted by constituents in my district regarding a distressing incident involving a property management company that embezzled over $2 million from several HOAs in District 25. While the owner of the property management company was prosecuted, the financial damage was already done, leaving these communities without reserve funds and unable to comply with the recent Maryland State Reserve Funds law. Despite the prosecution, the state failed to attach restitution with probation, leaving these communities without a means to collect the funds owed and unable to afford legal representation due to a lack of resources. House Bill 1041 is designed to address such issues that are beyond the control of residents in HOA communities. This legislation will provide residents with the opportunity to comply with the Maryland state law while granting them the compassion and time needed to recover from such significant financial losses, especially in today's challenging economic climate. This bill ensures that communities affected by unforeseen financial hardships such as fraud or other catastrophic events have a path to financial recovery. And by implementing a reserve recovery plan, HOAs will be able to meet the required reserve funding levels over a reasonable period without compromising their ability to maintain and repair common areas. This flexibility is essential for HOAs to continue providing safe and well-maintained living environments for their residents. In addition to offering a lifeline to HOAs in financial distress, House Bill 1041 promotes accountability and transparency within property management practices, thereby safeguarding the interests of our communities. It is our duty to protect these communities and ensure they have the tools and support necessary to navigate financial crisis effectively. So for these reasons, I respectfully request you to support House Bill 1041 and stand with our HOA residents securing their financial well-being and stability. And again, I will also note that I've already been in discussions with the chair and Delegate Holmes. I know that there are several bills addressing the reserve fund, so I was still advised to move forward with the hearing. Thank you.
Okay, any questions on the bill? Okay, your virtual witness, just FYI, is not on, so we're going to conclude the bill here on HB 1041. We'll turn to HB 1151. Delegate Taylor, residential real property sales appraisals. And Delegate Taylor, I just want to say I enjoyed your Black History moment today.
Thank you very much. Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Well, with that, welcome. Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Kim Taylor, representing Prince George's County's District 23. I am here today to introduce House Bill 1151, which seeks to create a reconsideration of value process as recommended by the Task Force on Property Appraisal and Valuation Equity. Appraisals play a critical role in the home buying process, yet countless studies have shown that properties in Black communities are consistently undervalued compared to similar homes in predominantly white neighborhoods. These inequities not only affect individual homeowners, but also contribute to broader disparities in wealth accumulation and neighborhood investment. The committee should have received an amendment which adds depth and provides clarity for potential reconsideration of value scenarios. I appreciate the input and suggestions from the Appraisal Institute and Maryland Realtors. I have incorporated some of their recommended language in the extensive amendment. In summary, when there's a sales transaction, House Bill 1151 provides the ability of the seller or seller's agent to provide additional market data or comps as requested by a lender or lender's appraiser if the appraisal falls below the contract price. When there is a home equity line of credit or refinance transaction, House Bill 1151 gives an owner the right to provide additional market data or comps if the appraised value falls short of the expected appraisal value. House Bill 1151 also requires a know your rights type of document and complaint process procedure be created and published on the DHCD website for use by appraisers and the public. I am aware that the appraisal complaints and challenges are currently handled by the Maryland's Commission on Civil Rights. That's a practical step in the right direction. I urge the committee to support HB 1151, which is a Black Caucus priority. By voting favorable, you are helping to ensure that all Maryland homeowners receive fair and accurate property valuations. Thank you.
Thank you. As many of you have observed to me, my great assistance, the video is frozen, the audio still appears to be working, so we're going to continue. Did you want to bring up Christian Jackson, who I think was on your panel?
Yes.
Great.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the Environmental and Transportation Committee. My name is Christian Jackson. I'm the owner of Jackson Appraisal Group and a certified residential appraiser of 18 years. I'm here to express my strong support for HB 1151, which introduces a practical solution to improve trust and transparency in the appraisal process. As someone who has appraised thousands of homes, I have seen how discrepancies in valuations can create significant challenges for both buyers and sellers. One of the most common concerns is when an appraisal comes in below the ratified contract price, potentially disrupting transactions, even in instances where there may be market data that supports a higher value. Similarly, homeowners looking to refinance often find themselves in a difficult position when they receive an appraisal that they feel is undervalued with no clear recourse other than making a plea to the original appraiser that sometimes falls on deaf ears. This bill addresses both issues by allowing sellers and refinancing borrowers to request a reconsideration under these circumstances. By allowing the reconsideration, HB 1151 introduces a necessary safeguard against potential errors or misjudgments in valuation while building trust in the appraisal process that an accurate valuation is being sought after. At its core, this bill supports fair and reliable home valuations for all market participants, buyers, sellers, and borrowers who deserve to have a valuation that they can trust on what is often the most significant investment of their lives. For these reasons, I strongly urge the committee to pass HB 1151. This strengthens the integrity of the appraisal process, supports the real estate market, and ensures that all parties have a fair opportunity to complete their transactions with confidence. Thank you for your time.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions for the sponsor or her panelist? Delegate Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Jackson, I appreciate you being here. The question I have is, are there any federal requirements for appraisers? Requirements. I know we have certification institutes and yada, yada, yada. I am asking, are there any federal requirements for appraisals?
None that I know of, sir.
Thank you.
Any further questions for the sponsor of our panelist? Okay, seeing none, I will call up some favorable amendment testimony. We have Scott DeBazio, Appraisal Institute, and Lisa May for the Maryland Realtors.
Can we stay with you?
You can. You don't have to stay there, Delegate.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman and Vice Chair Boyce and distinguished members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. I'm Scott DiBiasio, and I'm here today on behalf of the Appraisal Institute, the nation's largest organization of professional real estate appraisers. AI is in strong support of House Bill 1151 to give buyers and sellers, as well as property owners, the right to obtain a reconsideration of value, or in some cases, a second appraisal, if their first appraisal does not meet their expectations, specifically if the appraised value of the property is below what the property owner, buyer, or seller think the value should be. I thank Delegates Taylor and Holmes, who have taken a strong interest in appraisal issues over the last several years. They've brought several bills that have emanated from the Task Force on Property Appraisals and Valuation Equity, a task force that was formed by this body in 2022. Delegate Taylor did a nice job of presenting House Bill 1151. We have been working with her on a package of amendments that make a good bill even better. We urge this committee to report this bill favorably with the amendments that Delegate Taylor is working on. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'd be happy to stand for any questions, including the previous question from Delegate Holmes that I do have an answer for.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Vice Chair, members of the committee. Again, Lisa May with Maryland Realtors. We are here favorable with amendments. We do understand that Delegate Taylor has prepared that package of amendments. We just received a copy of those about an hour ago, so we have not had a chance to look at those in depth to see if they address our concerns. But our concerns were essentially that we need a clearer definition of what current market value is. For instance, the contract price that is agreed to by both the buyer and the seller. And then more broadly, this bill needs to work in concert with the federal reconsideration of value process. And as long as we accomplish those two things, then I think we will have a product that we can support. So we thank Delegates Taylor and Holmes and ask for a favorable report.
Thank you very much. Guess what? We have a question from Delegate Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. DeBazio, for my opportunity to ask this question. Are there any federal requirements for appraisers?
Yes. The GSEs and their regulator, the Federal Housing Finance Agency, as well as FHA, the Federal Housing Administration, and HUD, and also the federal bank regulatory agencies, put out a policy, gosh, it's about a year or so ago now, that requires all lenders to have in place processes within their institutions for a reconsideration of value. And those policies need to lay out what the responsibilities of each party are in that reconsideration of value. What the appraiser can and cannot do, what the lender can and cannot do, and what the borrower can and cannot do. The borrower does, in fact, have a very important role in that process in terms of presenting additional information to the appraiser, something that's covered in this bill.
Can you send that to us, please?
Absolutely, sir.
I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Further questions for this panel? Okay, thank you. We do have some unfavorable testimony. Dennis Rasmussen, the Rasmussen Group. Are you here? Once, going twice. Okay, that concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 1151. We'll turn to House Bill 1063. Delegate Lehman on behalf of the Montgomery and Prince George's delegations. WSSC, Design and Construction, Alternative Product Delivery and Solicitation Methods.
Mr. Chair, I'm presenting House Bill 1063 and 1065 back to back. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So I'll begin with HB 1063. Good afternoon, colleagues. For the record, I am Delegate Mary Lehman, presenting House Bill 1063 on behalf of the Prince George's County House Delegation. The title is Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission Design and Construction, Alternative Project Delivery and Solicitation Methods. This bill was at the request of WSSC. By way of background, under existing law, a design-build contract means a contract that provides for both architectural and engineering design services and construction services as a part of a single contract. A facilities construction contract means a contract that provides services for construction of a water or wastewater treatment plant, a water or wastewater pumping station and related force mains in the pumping station site limits, a water storage facility, a wastewater storage facility, a building for commission purposes, or a pipeline. And what the bill does is repeals a requirement that provides the commission may only enter into a design-build contract for a facilities construction contract with costs exceeding $2 million. In addition, the commission may adopt regulations to establish alternative project delivery and solicitation methods that promote the best interests of the commission. Mr. Chairman, you should have a letter in the file dated February 5th from the Prince George's County House Delegation requesting that the Environment and Transportation Committee vote this bill favorably, since the delegation voted it favorably. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Can you just pull a mic closer to you? Thank you. And also, I think Lorenzo Bellamy might be here favorable also, if you want to come on up. Okay, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and members of the committee. My name is Iyad Mizian. I'm the Chief Engineer at WSSC. I'm here to testify in support of House Bill 1063, Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission Design and Construction, Alternative Project Delivery and Solicitation Methods. WSSC Water requests this legislation to update the commission operations by aligning with current industry practices, helping WSSC Water to serve as a more efficient, cost-effective, and advanced water utility. As we heard Delegate Lehman, this proposed legislation repeals the provision in current law limiting WSSC Water to only enter in design bid-build contracts for facility construction projects exceeding $2 million, and authorizes the Commission to adopt alternative project delivery and solicitation methods in the best interest of the Commission. Alternative methods such as construction manager at risk, CMAR, and progressive design build are commonly used throughout the water industry. Through these methods, the contractor is involved at each stage of the project, as opposed to the design bid build contracts where the contractor is not involved in the planning and design phases, which often leads to several change orders and increased construction costs and delays. Earlier involvement of the contractor helps streamline the construction process, ensuring the needs of the project are accurately assessed, minimizing the need for change orders, and potentially shortening the project timeline and providing cost savings. This bill promotes financial stewardship and strengthens the Commission's financial outlook and operational efficiency, a benefit to all WSSC water ratepayers. Therefore, we respectfully request the Commission's support of HB 1063, and our team looks forward to working with this honorable committee during the 2025 state legislation session to promote this bill. I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions on the bill? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 1063. We can go right to House Bill 1065. Again, Delegate Lehman on behalf of the two delegations, Board of Appeals membership, and I think we have our former colleague Delegate Fisher and Marveline Nettle Simpson here to testify.
Thank you, Delegate.
Unfortunately, never a member of this committee, but still a fine member of the House of Delegates. Delegate Lehman, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and colleagues. Again, for the record, Delegate Mary Lehman, presenting House Bill 1065 on behalf of the Prince George's County House Delegation. So the title of this bill is Prince George's County Board of Appeals membership. And by way of background, under existing law, each of the Board of Appeals board members must be a resident of the county. A term is 4 years, and compensation is determined by the county council. The bill summary is as follows. It provides that the Prince George's County Council must appoint at least 3 members rather than just 3 total to the Prince George's County Board of Zoning Appeals. Additionally, a simple majority of the board must concur in any resolution by the board. And again, Mr. Chair, you should have a letter in the file dated February 5th from the Prince George's County House delegation indicating that it has voted favorably on HB 1065 and is in turn requesting a favorable report from this committee. I gather there have been some issues with attendance on this board over the years and a difficulty in having a quorum or a majority to vote on cases. So with me is Councilwoman Juanita Fisher. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be with you, Chair Corman and Vice Chair Boyce. It's great to be with y'all's committee. My name is Juanita Fisher. I'm the council member for District 2, and I vice chair our General Assembly Committee for the Prince George's County Council. Delegate Lehman was so eloquent. We've had some attendance issues with the Board of Appeals, and unlike other jurisdictions, Prince George's County, as an actual council, votes on zoning and those type of issues. And so we need a place where you appeal those issues or those votes and decisions. So having 3 members would be most useful. Thank you very much.
Greetings, Chair Corman and Vice Chair Boyce. I'm Jabari Cooper here subbing in for Marveline Nettle Simpson here on behalf of the Prince George's County Council, and Delegate Lehman eloquently summarized the bill. And if anyone has any questions, I'm here to answer them.
Great. Any questions on this bi-county bill? Okay, thank you. That concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 1065. We'll turn to House Bill 1066. Brooks Scoville on behalf of Delegate Terrassa. Residential real property, landlord and tenant, notice of landlord entry. And if there's a panel, please bring them up.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and the friendly committee members of ENT. I am Brooke Scoville, Delegate Terrassa's Chief of Staff. She regrets that she cannot be here today due to illness. Thank you for the opportunity to present HB 1076, which specifies that landlords can only enter leased residential premises under one of the following conditions: between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m., if the tenant has been given at least 48 hours in advance of a planned entry for reasons such as maintenance and repair work, in the event of an emergency to ensure the imminent protection, preservation, or safety of the property or its occupants, or if the tenant gives specific permission to enter the property sooner. Here's some background and the reason for the bill. When a landlord rents a property, they can contractually grant the tenant the exclusive right to occupy this property. Tenants reasonably believe that they are entitled to privacy in exchange for their obligations under the lease. That is, tenants are entitled to reside in their homes without undue interference from the landlord or third parties. Obviously, there are situations when the landlord may need to enter a rented property. In addition to emergency situations, these include entry for the purposes of repairs, inspections, or showing the unit to a prospective tenant or buyer. Other than in emergency circumstances, such visits are generally not of an urgent nature and can and should be scheduled in advance. Currently, while some counties offer some guidance, Maryland does not have a statewide law that addresses landlord entry. This gap in the law can lead to problems ranging from inconvenience to awkward to completely inappropriate. For example, folks may be in the middle of a family meal or a bedtime routine. The person could be having a work meeting or even a date night. Even more disturbing are accounts of landlords who suspiciously enter the property repeatedly when a lone female tenant is showering or undressed. Beyond inconvenience, outright inappropriateness, or danger, a major problem with this lack of clarity in the law is that it allows landlords to raise the tenant's supposed refusal to allow entry into the property as a defense in a rent escrow case. This interferes with one of the few remedies tenants have when a landlord refuses to perform necessary repairs, which is escrowing the rent money, and gives unscrupulous landlords an excuse for that inaction. So the solution is House Bill 1076. It will help avoid these issues by setting a clear standard of notice and acceptable purposes for entry, and help prevent landlords from improperly raising the tenant's failure to let the landlord in as a defense in rent escrow cases. So please note, House Bill 1076 contains an exception for emergency situations or where the tenant gives explicit permission to enter the premises. Many landlords already recognize that it is beneficial to have clear rules communicated to tenants regarding landlord entry. For this reason, residential leases often contain a provision governing when a landlord may enter. Out of 50 states in the District of Columbia, 38 jurisdictions have laws addressing when a landlord may enter a rented property. They have these laws because they simply make sense. It's time for Maryland to join them. I respectfully urge a favorable report on HB 1076, and I'll note that Delegate Terraza has had conversations with some of the opposition and is considering some amendments to the bill. And then I'd like to pass it off to Jennifer Mercer.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, members of the committee. My name is Jennifer Mercer, and I'm a staff attorney at Pro Bono Resource Center of Maryland. I represent tenants facing eviction primarily in Baltimore County. I'd like to thank Delegate Terraza for sponsoring this important bill. I regularly hear from tenants whose landlords enter their homes unannounced. I have many clients who work from home or care for children during the day and cannot stop what they are doing whenever the landlord happens to show up. My standard advice to tenants is that unless their lease provides otherwise, there is no requirement for the landlord to provide any notice before entering. And if the tenant rents from a large professional management company, it's likely that the lease does indeed have some provision stating that the landlord will provide notice before entering. Corporate landlords have their own attorneys who write their leases as favorably as possible to their clients. Why would they put language requiring notice, which restricts what their own clients can do with the property they own, in their leases if the law does not require that? They do it because they know it's in the best interest of the landlord to avoid conflict with tenants who are also their customers. They understand that unannounced intrusion into a private residence is likely to result in complaints and that a tenant has a legal right to quiet enjoyment of the premises. Where I often see problems arise is with smaller professional landlords and private individuals who rent out homes. Maryland law does allow tenants to legally withhold rent payments if the landlord fails to fix conditions in the rental property that are hazardous to life, health, or safety, but they must allow the landlord an opportunity to fix the problem first. Trouble arises in court when it comes out that the landlord has repeatedly sent maintenance with no notice. The tenant can try to reschedule, but failing that, all the landlord needs to do in court to escape their obligation to provide habitable housing is to claim that the tenant did not allow access. House Bill 1076 sets basic parameters to avoid these conflicts. Recently, I had a client whose landlord frequently barged in while she was in a state of undress. Of course, the lease did not require him to provide any notice before entering. This is why House Bill 1076 requires the landlord to have a legitimate reason to enter the property in addition to providing notice. Thank you.
Chair, members of the committee, Albert Turner of the Public Justice Center, coming in favorable for House Bill 1076. I'll be brief. I would just like to reiterate some of what Ms. Mercer has noted, particularly the issues in court when we were talking about the tenant giving the landlord access to the property. In many jurisdictions in Maryland, there is a licensing requirement, meaning the property needs to be licensed. What that means is that if the property is not licensed, the landlord needs to make the proper changes to the property in order to be licensed, which means that they need access to the property. In a lot of issues where there's failure to pay rent cases, tenant holding over matters, or even breach of lease cases where there is no license, a big element of that case is whether or not the tenant gave the landlord adequate access to the property. And what that means is that the tenant or the landlord or the judge must decide whether or not there was reasonable notice given to the tenant and the tenant gave reasonable access to the landlord. We believe this bill gives clarity to that type of case where there is a reasonableness type of issue that needs to be adjudicated, where there's a lot of he said, she said in those matters. We believe that this bill falls neatly in line with other jurisdictions. We believe that this gives clarity to tenants and to landlords when they can and cannot show up to the property, and it allows the court to adjudicate these type of matters more cleanly. Thank you.
Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, members of the committee, Zephyr Shaw, Maryland Legal Aid. We urge a favorable report on House Bill 1076. As a legal services practitioner, I co-sign on on the statements that came before mine. I want to stress that at Legal Aid, we handle thousands of cases. We represented tenants in over 4,000 cases last year and provided advice, legal advice on thousands more cases. And the instances that you've heard about of contractors or landlords or the agents walking in on single females, as well as on minor children whose parents are not at home, is something that happens all the time. So while courts might rule that there's a standard for reasonableness on entry of a landlord, which might be 24 hours, often these things are happening in the absence of a court case. It shouldn't take a judge's ruling to determine what's a reasonable standard for the landlord's entry. That's why this bill is so important. I'll stop there and urge your favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a question from Delegate Healy.
Thank you very much. I just was looking at the fiscal note, and I see that this is different from Prince George's County, which has a 24-hour notice, and you are proposing a statewide 48-hour. Yeah. Do you know what the other local laws are and how they line up with this proposal?
I am not aware of any other local law within the state of Maryland that addresses this issue specifically. I don't know if my colleagues can chime in on that, but I'm not aware of any local law other than the one in Prince George's that deals specifically with this issue.
And why did you choose to, override the Prince George's law, which seems to be working for Prince George's County?
Why did we override it?
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you that in discussions with Delegate Terraza, this bill was based off of the city code in DC, which does provide for 48 hours. So that was our starting point. I understand that some of our opposition does want to reduce the window to 24 hours. We're in talks with them about that. It's not something that we're necessarily opposed to, but we started it based on modeling after our sister jurisdiction nearby.
Thank you.
Okay. Delegate Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for bringing this bill. Thank you to Delegate Terraza. I know she can't be with us today, but I am a co-sponsor, a proud co-sponsor, but I do have a question about a provision on page 2, and it is paragraph 2, starting with line 14. A landlord may enter the leased premises without providing notice in the event of an emergency to ensure imminent protection or preservation of the property or the protection and safety of occupants. I was curious, like, under what scenario would a landlord need to go in for the safety of the occupants where the landlord would not instead be calling 911? Like, can you come up with any scenario where that would be necessary? Or it would be more appropriate for a landlord to enter than an emergency, responders?
The first example that I have that comes to mind, Delegate, would be something to the effect of if there are children who are alone in the home and if there were to be some sort of catastrophic event, like perhaps one part of the property is on fire and it's necessary to throw a door open to get somebody out. I mean, we've tried to, part of why we went with occupants too instead of tenants is the recognition that there may be individuals living in the home, including children who are not necessarily tenants. And so I think the scenarios in which that would be necessary are few and far between, but what we don't want is any unintended consequence of saying, oh, well, the law forbids me to do anything about this emergent situation. Although certainly I would suggest, if a landlord were asking me what to do in this scenario, I would certainly suggest calling emergency services.
Okay, and so that would be like a scenario where the landlord hears about it first, maybe from a neighbor or
yes.
Okay.
For something like that, I'm envisioning more so smaller landlords than, who might live next door or something to that effect, as opposed to a corporate entity that manages a large building.
Okay. Also, and I'm not sure I heard all of Delegate Healy's question, but I believe that the city of College Park has a notice requirement for landlords because this issue came up in my office a few years ago, and I represent College Park, obviously, but I believe it's because there are so many renters because of the university. But thank you for the presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any additional questions? Okay, thank you for subbing in. We will now call up unfavorable testimony, Matthew Pipkin, MMHA, and Bill Costelli on behalf of the Realtors.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Bill Castelli on behalf of the Realtors. And we appreciate Delegate Terrassa reaching out to us about the bill. In general, we agree with much of what the previous panel said. There should not be landlords or property managers entering someone's residence without some kind of notice, especially late at night or super early in the morning, things like that. But we do have some concerns about this bill in particular. One of the things is that you've heard about the 24-hour notice. That is in almost every lease I have ever seen. There's a 24-hour notice. It seems to have worked well for our members. It's recognized by the courts. And we are a little bit concerned as well about the limiting of when these service providers can get onto the property from like between 9 to 5. If you've ever tried to schedule, plumbers, anybody coming into a property, then, having a longer period of time is helpful. And just to address some of the questions of like what would be those imminent situations and emergency situations that might occur. I mean, it could be something as simple as a broken pipe where the water's just pouring down into another unit. There's literally nobody in that other upper unit where that water's coming from. You have to get into it to stop it. So there are instances like that that I think we would want to address, keep that language in there. And I will tell you, in most of the cases, this works well. Landlord, tenant have a conversation. Sometimes the tenant, wants to meet earlier because they want to be on the property. They don't want a service person in that property when they're not there. So just generally providing a little more flexibility into this to make sure that we cover those situations.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Matt Pipkin with the Maryland Multi-Housing Association, respectfully requesting an unfavorable report on HB 1076. Again, I'd like to extend my well wishes. I hope Delegate Terrassa is feeling better soon. Had a great conversation with her, but I do think right now we still have some significant operational and legal concerns. Again, not to restate what my colleague here said, but the operations of our business, requires us oftentimes to have to rely on contractors who we have to schedule out, and we have to, be able to get them to fit in within this window. I think you're going to run into some issues, and even if the tenant desires prompt attention in less than 48 hours notice, say a fridge went out or something to that effect, the housing provider will still need to wait for the tenant to agree in writing before the houser can react. It just prolongs everything. Again, it's a little burdensome. And with the liability portions of it, I mean, you're now asking for landlords to have to, go through the administrative burden, having everything documented. It adds a lot to the effect. And Delegate Lehman, I'll address your emergency concern as well. I will tell you, recently for me, I live in a multifamily building. My downstairs neighbor, who's an elderly man, there was a strong odor emitting from his doorway. There was talks of having the landlord come out and checking him out. Thankfully we were able to get it all concerned, but that's just a reality. And the way I read it, if, the elderly man or someone within his family didn't like that the landlord went in to check on him, now all of a sudden we have this issue where, injunctions can be filed and what have you. So, again, happy to work with the sponsor, but right now we have to be unfavorable. Thank you.
Great. We have a question from Delegate Ziegler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not a lawyer, so what does quiet enjoyment get you? That's usually in a lease, right, that you have the right to quiet enjoyment. I would think that would already prevent landlords from, bursting in on you at 11 p.m. or whatever.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why all the leases that our members use have a 24-hour notice period is precisely because of that. They don't want to be in violation of quiet enjoyment. So.
The last thing we want is unhappy tenants having conflicts with our managers and partners. So.
Right. Thank you.
Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So these provisions in that you cited, Mr. Castelli, on in these agreements, in these leases, so I understand that it's a shorter period of time, but what else is included in that, and why would it be onerous to put that into law if you already have those in your leases?
Well, I think if you are going to put it into law, and I think that's one of the conversations that we're having with Delegate Terraza, that reflecting what leases are currently doing for, the 24 hours instead of the 48 hours. And to give you an example, mostly this works. Mostly if there's an issue, the tenant will be the first to call the landlord about it. But that is not always the case. Sometimes the tenant may be in breach of lease. There may be a no pet policy on that unit. They've got 3 dogs. They don't want someone coming into their property. So they don't contact the landlord or the property manager, but somebody else does. It might be a neighbor. It might be another tenant. And then, so the landlord is trying to address an issue and get access for whatever reason, pipe broken, unit out, wire dangling off a single family home or something like that. And tenant is unresponsive because they don't want anybody on the property to see that they're subletting or doing something that might be in breach of the lease.
Okay, I see, but wouldn't like a wire dangling or even perhaps a leaky pipe that presented a threat to the property, I think, doesn't the bill cover that?
I think it's a good question of whether that's imminent danger or not. I think if it's an electric wire sparking, sure. If it's a cable that is a wire that's hanging low, like I've seen in some of my neighborhoods, maybe not. I don't know.
Thank you.
Delegate Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, gentlemen, I don't care, either one of you. We've just gone through some pretty harsh winter conditions out here. And in the summertime, you have the same conditions in the extreme heat. So would this 48-hour notice, if you had to go in and work on either heat or air conditioning, given the season, would that violate anything with 48 hours notice? Anything else that's existing? Because, if you had to wait 48 hours to go in and fix something, well, either you're freezing or you're cooking, so to speak.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if anything else is violated.
If you'd be violating habitability codes and stuff like that. I mean, I think in general, I think both the landlord and the tenant would normally agree getting onto the property, fixing the problem as soon as possible is what they want, both parties want. It's in instances where, and the few and far between instances where where the tenant really just doesn't want somebody onto the property for whatever reason. And that's kind of what we would like to address in this bill with some additional flexibility.
But I mean, for contractors, if you've got an emergency, contractors are typically working on something, and they, 9 to 5 in a perfect world would be nice, but in reality, most contractors are saying, well, I really don't have time, but I'll get there as soon as I get finished this job today or something like that. I mean, that's reality and when you get into this. So sometimes you have to work at the discretion of the contractor. Wouldn't you agree with that? I mean, I speak from my own experience.
Yeah, I can tell you we've had property managers who've dealt in the single-family contacts with a utility provider that's given an 8-hour window of when they might show up. So they have somebody sitting in a car in front of the house for 5 hours till the person shows up. So, I mean, there are definitely restricting that window, I think, would delay servicing in most
All right,
cases.
thank you. I was just thinking after all the severe weather we just went through, if you had to wait 48 hours to go in there and turn somebody's heat back on, you would make cross another line. So I just want to verify that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 1076. We'll turn to Delegate Holmes, House Bill 1128, Land Bank Authorities, Powers and Authority. If you have a panel, please bring them up.
Yes. As I speak. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Madam Vice Chair. I do appreciate the opportunity to present to you House Bill 1128, of which all the testimony for this particular bill is favorable, not even favorable with amendments, and there are no unfavorable. It is all favorable. Hint, hint, hint. This bill is relevant to land bank authorities. And quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, I did something relevant to land bank authorities many moon ago, authorization. And what this does, it authorizes, not mandates, municipalities and jurisdictions to take over properties that persons have not paid taxes on it or those kinds of things, so that the jurisdiction and municipalities can dispose of it properly. And I'm glad to say that just recently, in November of this year, Prince George's County did in fact enact their land bank authority that I put together many moon ago. So now they are operating their own land bank authority. We are here now to add some language to it, and I'm going to turn the floor over, Madam Chair, to the young lady sitting right next to me. And I may add that the young lady sitting next to me lives in the jurisdiction of Madam Vice Chair.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and my delegate. Members of the committee, my name is Odette Ramos. I am the City Councilwoman for Baltimore City's 14th District. I actually came before you for several bills in my previous role as the Executive Director of the Community Development Network of Maryland. It's great to be here with you all again, and thank you all for your work that you do on behalf of all Marylanders. This particular bill, I'm asking for your favorable report. Both Prince George's County and the municipality of Cambridge have finally passed legislation to create land banks. I will admit my bill in Baltimore City failed, and there's a whole story behind it. But part of the failure actually is why we're doing this bill. And there are things that the land bank authorities needed in order to have more be more effective. So that is included in this bill. It is a statewide bill. So one of the things that this does is it allows for land banks, for jurisdictions to allow their land banks to create and do in-rem actions. If you'll remember, we came before you several years ago, another bill of Delegate Holmes, to allow for jurisdictions to acquire vacant and abandoned properties. When the liens exceed the value of the property, the jurisdiction can foreclose, and it is a much faster way. It's called in-rem. It's a much faster way of acquiring properties. Baltimore City is the only jurisdiction that has implemented that, although I think others should. But what we're asking here in this bill is that jurisdictions allow their land banks to be able to conduct those in-rem actions on behalf of the jurisdiction, especially if they have land banks, to increase their capacity of their housing division or community development division. The next piece is to allow for land banks. Again, land banks, just as a definition, are quasi-governmental entities. They are part of the city government or county government, but they are also private public partnerships, so that there's a lot more flexibility. So just quickly, the two, if I may, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and Mr. Chair, is that the second and third thing that this bill does is allow for land banks to claw back any properties that they may have sold, but things are not happening with the property, and also allow for financing, to attract financing and make sure that those projects get done. So I would appreciate your favorable report. Again, this is authorizing for those jurisdictions that want to create land banks.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. I know you know the value of time limits in these public settings.
Yep.
Are there any questions for the sponsor or our Vice Chair's council member? Yes. Delegate Otto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I take it you're pooling properties that the city claims so that you could do a bigger project?
No, well, in some cases, maybe. If for example, there's a piece of property where the taxes have not been paid, and the property is sitting vacant, and it is an eyesore, vacant and abandoned, then there is a NREM. NREM is a term that means foreclosure against a thing and not a person. That's what NREM means. So you can foreclose against the property and take over that property, and then the municipality can sell that property and put it back into productive use.
Thank you. So what land banks do is just that, is they are helping the jurisdiction to acquire properties, and it could be for a larger project or it could be to address scatter site. And the beauty of INREM is that you don't have to auction the property to the highest bidder. You can actually work on creating the parcels that are needed for a larger project, and it can be done with the community in mind in terms of what they want to do.
And one other thing too is you can also strip off.
All the liens are gone.
Yeah, the liens. For example, if there's a water and sewer bill still owed on it, you can strip that off to make it more attractive for the entity and the third party to purchase and rebuild upon it.
That was my next question. It will discharge any obligations that recorded property owner has at that time.
Yeah, those things stay with the previous owner, with the foreclosure or the lien took place, but the entity takes it clean.
I don't know if that answers my question. Oh. Is there any ground rents involved in this?
King Charles I in the summer of 1634 is not involved.
All right, any additional questions? Okay, is Paul Ellington here, state and local advisors? Nope. Okay, that concludes Bill hearing on House Bill 1128. We'll turn to our last bill of the day, House Bill 1152, Delegate Stein, Real Property Pet Policy Transparency Act. And if you have a panel, please bring them up.
And Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and committee members, this is House Bill 1152, the Pet Policy Transparency Act. And especially for Delegate Allen and Delegate Jacobs who are here, say as well, I am wearing my Labrador tie in honor of this occasion in support of pets. So we all know there's a shortage of affordable rental housing, and one issue that can make the issue worse for tenants is pet ownership. Nearly 3/4 of renters have pets, but rental housing that's affordable and will accept pets is hard to find. Often people who are looking for housing don't learn about a rental unit's policy until they've signed a lease, and then they're required to give up their pets. A quick review of 400 rentals listed on the website mdhousingsearch.org found only 67 that would accept pets, and most of those required the renter to call the landlord to find out what their policy and specific pets that were accepted. So this legislation requires all rental housing providers to make their policies regarding pets more transparent by publicizing it on a property's website, providing in digital advertising and on residential search engines, and giving a written copy of the policy with the tenant application. So this bill by itself, it won't increase the amount of pet-friendly housing available, but it will make it easier for renters with pets to locate housing that will allow them to keep their pets, as opposed to having to knock on a lot of doors where the notice about the rental doesn't provide information on pet rentals. So with that, I urge a favorable report and turn things over to my panelists.
Hi, Chair, Vice Chair, and esteemed committee. My name is Stacy Volodin. I am the Maryland State Director for Humane World for Animals, formerly called the Humane Society of the United States. I am here on behalf of our supporters to support this bill enthusiastically. It is incredibly simple, and it has no fiscal impact on the state. I want to highlight that. It's really only seeking clarity and consistency across rental property listings. To elaborate on the bill sponsor's testimony regarding the 400 affordable housing units that were called by one of our team members. Of that 17% that said that they had a pet policy, some of those did list that you had to call for details. When the person called for the details, oftentimes they were told they would be called back and not receive a call, or they were told that the person who answered was unsure, things like that. Especially when you're facing a housing crisis, every second counts. None of us can buy more time. And when you are in an urgent situation like that, the time matters. This also eliminates a little bit of the burden on the person offering the rental unit, because they can filter out the people that they do not want if they do not want pet owners. We have to talk about, it is a burden on the state to have our shelters overflowing, and any assistance that we can provide is a win regarding that. It's a simple bill. It just removes a barrier, saves a few minutes per listing per renter. So with that, I want to thank Delegate Stein for his constant championing of the human pet bond and urge a favorable vote.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Katie Flory, and I am the Community Care and Advocacy Director with the Maryland SPCA, but I am also the Treasurer of PAWS, which is the Professional Animal Workers Society, and I'm here testifying on behalf of them today. And I can tell you, this is a bill we really, really need around the state of Maryland. I don't think there's a shelter right now that is not full. And one of the biggest things that we are hearing from people that are surrendering their animals is they are not able to find pet-friendly housing. And oftentimes when someone does have to move, they are spending a lot of time searching for the right place for them and for their pets. And if this bill would make it so much easier for people in Maryland to find out where they can take a pet and where they cannot. And to add to what Stacy also said, what we're also finding is, yes, they might say they accept pets, but it's either only cats, or there's a weight restriction, or there is a breed restriction, and a million other barriers that do not allow for that person to be able to find acceptable housing based on the animals they have. I also want to add that I am also a landlord. I do rent out a property, and I actually only want people to have animals in my home. It is such an important small step that we can take to make sure that pets and people can stay together. So thank you for allowing me to testify, and I also urge a favorable report.
Good afternoon, Chair, Co-Chair, and Committee. My name is Katie Haynes, and I am the Assistant Director of Community Care and Advocacy for the Maryland SPCA. I'm representing the SPCA, but this is also an issue of personal concern as a renter. Like Katie mentioned, we do have an unprecedented number of animals that are flowing into the shelters. In 2024 alone, we saw about 3,400 animals come into our shelter. About 40% of those are owner surrenders that are having to make that really, really difficult decision to surrender their pet. The primary reason being insecurity in that pet-friendly housing. There is a major shortage there. From talking to adopters, these owners that are surrendering, and our staff, what we're seeing is there's a lot of confusion, misinformation, and inconsistencies in what they're getting in terms of that pet policy from their places that they're living or looking to move to. I also want to speak on my personal experience as a renter. 2 years ago, as I was apartment shopping, I was looking for an apartment that did accept dogs. That was really my primary concern when I was looking. I didn't have a dog at the time, but I knew in the next year or two that I would want to adopt. I did my homework, and I consider myself a professional in this field, and I did find a place that allowed cats large dogs and small dogs. Just thought it was good to go. About a year ago, I reached out to the landlord to ask if I could add a dog onto my my leasing agreement. And what I found out was the third floor did not allow animals. The first and second floors, you could have cats, dogs, large and small, but that top floor, you weren't allowed to, which was not something I knew until I had that final conversation. This is just one example of many, and I just wanted to share that, which is why I also urge a favorable vote for this issue.
Thank you. I have a question from Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Delegate. I think this is an excellent bill. I have a question, though. It does say that, among other things, that the landlord or the landlord needs to provide a link to the property's pet policy on their website and in any digital advertisement. And my question is, would you be willing to just say in any advertisement? There are QR codes, for example, that if you posted it either, on a bulletin board, for example, I think it should be, my opinion is it probably should just be any advertisement. So I'm just asking whether you'd be willing to consider that.
Yeah, that's a reasonable suggestion.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I do not see any other questions. There is additional. Oh, sorry, Delegate Holmes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I understand that this probably works a little bit differently for large property managers. For small property managers, like myself, for example, there is no property website. In addition to that, advertising is done through the multiple listing service. Okay? I'm not quite sure how I could provide this without getting myself and others with small property management companies into big trouble. Is there any suggestion that you can give to us to address that concern?
Well, I'd be happy to talk with you more, Delegate, about that. Certainly if the types of sites that are listed here, website, digital advertisement, et cetera, don't apply to a particular landlord, then be happy to say it doesn't matter.
I do appreciate it. Thank you. I just want to take that into consideration.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Okay, we have additional favorable testimony live from Albert Turner, Renters United Maryland. You guys are free to go. Thanks.
Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee, I'll be brief. Albert Turner, the Public Justice Center, coming in favorable for this bill. You will actually be surprised how many calls we get from renters who are asking for units that will take their pets. That is something that they struggle to find. Obviously, we're in a housing crisis, and for tenants who have pets, they might be a little large, they might be not a cat or dog, maybe something else. The clarity on whether or not this place is accepting of their animals can be a little unclear. And so we believe this bill is a good step towards making sure that when a tenant knows exactly where a property, they know exactly where they can apply that will accept their pet. And so for that reason, we ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Seeing no questions, we'll call up our virtual favorable witness, Lisa Radoff, Maryland Votes for Animals.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, members of the committee. Lisa Radoff here for Maryland Votes for Animals in favor of HB 1152. The hour is late. I don't want to restate all the points that you've heard about this bill and why it's so important. I just wanted to mention that a national study conducted by the ASPCA revealed that renters are more likely to need to rehome their pets for housing-related issues than for any other reason. As we know, pets are treasured members of our family. Having to rehome a pet can be traumatic, not only for the pet, but also for the family. As you've heard, our shelters are over capacity, and this is a major reason that is the fact. We also recognize that there is a legitimate shortage of affordable housing for people with pets. This bill is a small first step towards dealing with this issue. I'd like to thank Speaker Pro Tem Stein for his sponsorship of HB 1152 and urge a favorable report.
Great. Seeing no questions, that concludes the bill hearing on 1152 and all the bill hearings for today. A few announcements. So one, just a reminder, if you need something delivered to you while you're here, have your staff go through the office and we will get it to you. Trooper Mitchell doesn't know who everyone approaching the horseshoe is, and so the best thing to do is send it through the office. If you've been enjoying the snacks and you haven't contributed to the snack fund and you're financially able to, I would ask that you contribute to the snack fund through Trish. No surprise, we'll be voting on Friday. Keep that in mind. Next week we'll probably vote at least twice, so keep that in mind. And now the announcement you all really want to hear today in ENT history. Delegate Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm really dipping into my professorial bag of tricks today. It has been 52 years since this committee deliberated on the General Assembly's most recently introduced Bill of Attainder. So for a refresher who haven't been through sixth grade history recently, a Bill of Attainder is a piece of legislation that punishes a person or a group of people without a judicial trial. A common feature of English life in the 16th, 17th, 18th century, bills of attainder were first outlawed in Maryland with Article 16 of the Maryland Declaration of Rights. We were the first jurisdiction in the world to include this express provision in a constitution, and we later inspired Article 1, Section 9 of the U.S. Constitution, which did the same. One of our committee colleagues, this is not actually the moment in history, but one of our committee colleagues, just as an aside, her great-great-great-grandfather, I think I have that right, Delegate Ziegler, Charles Carroll Carrollton, was very involved actually with the drafting of this provision. But the actual moment in history is in 1973, Delegate William Burkhead introduced a bill to this committee that would ban Jane Fonda from the state and confiscate any money made in Maryland by her movies. Her alleged offenses were, quote unquote, calling for victory by the Viet Cong, aiding American deserters in France, urging rebellion by American military men, and portraying a prostitute in one of her movies. In the hearing, no member of this committee voiced any opposition to the bill, but there was plenty of support. When one delegate suggested that Ms. Fonda be executed, the bill sponsor stated, quote unquote, I wouldn't go so far as to say execute her, but I do think we should cut her tongue out. Another delegate said that Warren Beatty, Anthony Quinn, and many other directors were making, quote unquote, revolutionary type movies that threaten the republic, and suggested that the state of Maryland should create an O rating for movies featuring any actors working for the overthrow of the government. The bill sponsor later admitted in an interview with the press that he liked one of Fonda's films, Cat Ballou, and said she was, quote unquote, a nice looking girl, but there was, quote unquote, something wrong with her as a citizen. Ultimately, the bill was put in the drawer. So let's give a hand to ourselves and our more immediate predecessors for going, indeed, a full 52 years since running afoul of one of the state's oldest constitutional prohibitions.
All right, subcommittee announcements, Vice Chair Boyce.
Natural Resources will meet at 5 o'clock.
Chair Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Land Use and Ethics Subcommittee will meet about 15 minutes after Natural Resources ends. So watch your emails and texts. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everybody. We are adjourned.